Talk Show. Recorded live.
Welcome to the Tuesday Night's Triumph Over Targeting podcast. I'm your moderator, Ella, and tonight we have another special guest, Richard Lighthouse. A couple of things before we get the interview going. If you are new to the call, please stay on, and we will get you some additional support, some additional Talk Show podcast numbers, and some helpful links and websites. This is a solutions and educational-based podcast, but the views and opinions of my guests are not necessarily my own personal views and opinions. My goal is that everyone can obtain something out of tonight, especially a feeling of empowerment. If you have any suggestions, comments, questions, or especially if you are in need of some additional support, please don't hesitate to email me at tiangel2016@gmail.com. And then I want to let you guys know that when we get to the questions and answers portion of the interview, you'll star 8. And then when I get to you, I will unmute you, and you will hear a prompt that tells you that you're being unmuted. And at that point, you'll be free to ask your question. So now, to get to our guest, a little bit about Richard. Richard holds a Master of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from Stanford University and has previously worked for NASA. He is currently an executive in the energy industry, and he's written over 100 ebooks and started investigating satellite weapons and global microwave torture of thousands of people in January 2016. Richard himself has become a target of the government. For more than 4 years, this author has been stalked, harassed, and threatened by U.S. government agents from the CIA, FBI, and NSA. He believes this is due to the contents of his books. His home has been broken into repeatedly, and in May 2014, his girlfriend was drugged and kidnapped from LaGuardia Airport. His computer, phone, and alarm system have been hacked, including those of his friends and family. He believes these agencies have become criminal organizations. And I think most of us will agree with that on this call. And, the people who listen to these calls fully are on board with that belief system. So maybe if it's okay with you, we can go back a little bit, and I'd like to discuss your background a little bit further. And if that's okay with you, can we do that?
Sure.
So, yeah, I understand, you got a degree in mechanical engineering, and so it's always nice to know what a person's life was to kind of get a framework of what your life was like prior to this discovery that you made and going down these little rabbit holes and before you were kind of targeted by the government. So would you give us a little information and tell us a little bit about that?
I'm an engineer by training, and I started my career in the aerospace industry and then moved into the energy industry. And beginning about 2009, 2010, I started working on some technical papers involving some complex subjects in mathematics related to Einstein's relativity theory. And I started developing those ideas and began to publish them on the internet. And I was excited about it, but didn't think anything would come of it right away. Then, sometime during 2012, odd things started to happen around the house. My home started to be broken into on a regular basis. Nothing was stolen, but things in the house had clearly been moved. Repositioned furniture, books, things in the cabinets. All the drawers had been gone through, files. It was clear that someone was repeatedly getting into the house. And after I started telling my family and friends about it, it became blatant. It became to where they would deliberately break the padlock that I would put on the garage door. I removed the electronic garage door opener and put a padlock on the outside, and they would deliberately break it so that when I came home, I would find the padlock broken. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. And maybe some listeners had similar experiences, but anyway, I didn't want to cover so much background. I think where I can provide the most value tonight is on technical subjects. I know lots of folks have provided stories, and those stories are interesting and compelling, what I hope to provide tonight is a scientific and engineering perspective on some of the technologies that are being used and how to disable some of them. And I think that would be very helpful to some people.
Yeah, I think that would be very welcomed. But there are just a couple of questions I had that I think would interest the listeners as well. Is when this started occurring with you, most people are curious how someone finds out about the word targeted individual, how that comes into your consciousness, and how you became, what compelled you to actually write books on the topic, other than maybe your personal experience.
I do a lot of research, and anyone that's read through my website will see that I'm interested in a great variety of topics, and so and I'm just a creative person. So that's what drove my interest in researching this topic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then did someone come out, the first time you heard the word, did someone approach you or write you a letter, or you just kind of figured it out, or you found some information online?
I don't recall exactly how that came about, but yeah.
Yeah, and then I know that you also go into depth about mind control, subliminal mind control. I know that's an area that also interests you, and that kind of ties into us as well. And then you seem fairly certain that satellites have something to do with the targeting and with the subliminals. Can you tell us why that you believe it's satellites?
Well, I have measured, I've had extended discussions with 3 different individuals, and I think these, and I'm not going to identify them by name for their own privacy, but I've had extensive discussions and taken measurements and confirmed independently some of the things that are occurring. And that's also corroborated by many of the stories I've read from John Finch, Dr. Catherine Horton, Dr. John Hall, and many others that are names that are probably familiar to some readers and listeners. One of the things that's particularly compelling is some of the frequencies that I measured using what's called a signal analyzer. A signal analyzer is a scientific engineering tool that can be used to measure the frequency of a signal. And what's interesting about these particular signals is they're fairly unique in the frequency spectrum. There are the satellite targeting, a little bit of history on the satellite targeting. Reagan's Star Wars program was announced back in the 1980s. In spite of what was announced by the government as official information, and what we were told later on is they had spent billions of dollars, but nothing ever got put in orbit, and that's a lie. That's simply not true. There are many satellites in orbit. They're placed in geosynchronous orbit. That's a term that means that the satellite stays stationary to the ground. In other words, it's orbiting the Earth at about 20,000 miles per hour, but the satellite stays fixed above one place on the ground. And that's what enables it to track and target things over a specific area that the satellite is located above. Now, these particular satellites were designed to attack ballistic missiles in the launch phase or the ascent phase. Now, if I use some technical terms here, write it down or ask me a question, and I'll try to explain it a little bit further. But the Star Wars program was designed to attack a ballistic missile in the ascent phase. Now, what is apparent is that these satellites stayed in orbit for several years and had basically nothing to do. And at some point, somebody decided to point them on the ground and noticed that when the intensity of the signal was turned down, that they could target people or individuals or groups on the ground. And I would suspect, and again, this is just my opinion, that the initial tracking and targeting was not very accurate. But some folks have described the technology as being alien. It's not. The technology that's used is actually quite simple. And if you download my free ebook called The Microwave Torture of Ed Snowden and Julian Assange, you will see I provide diagrams and math that explains how the technology works, and it's not complicated. It's not some sophisticated, advanced alien technology or any other terms that you want to use. It's a simple, repetitive signal that's used, and then you use pluses or minuses to determine where a target is moved. It does not require any chip implants. It does not require radio frequency tracking on the ground. All of this can be done without any chips or tracking on the ground. The satellites have the capability to track a target by firing multiple little bullets or shots. And then based on the reflection of each one of those bullets, they can tell how a target is tracked and moving. So again, there's no chip that is required to use this, okay? Now let me back up again and describe what these satellites were originally intended for. Everyone's familiar with a microwave oven. And if you've ever accidentally put a piece of metal in a microwave oven, you know what happens. Literally in 1 second, that piece of metal will start sparking. And you can imagine if that metal was microcircuits on a guidance and navigation and control system inside the nose cone of a ballistic missile. If that's hit with microwaves, literally in 1 to 2 seconds, all of those circuits can be overloaded and melted. Now, imagine these circuits are just tiny little pieces of metal wire on a circuit board. So any burst of microwave energy will literally fry those circuits in 1 to 2 seconds, okay, very quick. That's what these satellites were designed to do. That's why they shoot microwave bullets, and that's how the tracking system was designed to track the nose cone of a missile and then fire on it. So there are literally 2 separate signals that are used in targeting individuals on the ground. There's a tracking and geolocation signal, and the second signal is what you call the harm signal, the one that they can turn up to a very high intensity. Now the tracking signal operates at a frequency of about 3650 megahertz. That's 3650 megahertz. And the signal actually varies quite a bit because the more people they try to track, the larger the signal width they have to take up. So I would estimate roughly that between about 3,600 and 3,750 megahertz, you'll find that tracking signals are being used. So if someone uses a signal analyzer, they're going to discover there's 2 signals that are coming down. The second signal is the harm signal. And that's a very tight range of signals between 3921 megahertz and 3934 megahertz. That's the measurements that I've taken on these signals. It's a very narrow range. And the reason it's such a narrow range is because it tells you that all the satellites were designed with the same component. That harm signal is basically the resonant cavity that you find in your microwave oven, except it's even smaller, but it runs at a much higher power level. And the way a microwave, and I won't want to get into details on how a microwave oven works, but basically it looks like a hollow metal ball about the size of a baseball. And when you put a spark through there between the negative and positive anodes in that chamber, it creates a resonant frequency that's equal to the size of that metal chamber. And the frequency gets higher as that metal ball gets smaller. Okay, I'm not sure you all are following me, but so you can basically appreciate, if you look at a microwave diagram, how a microwave oven is constructed, you can get a basic idea of what goes into designing these satellites. Now, immediately after this resonant cavity that's shaped kind of like about the size of a baseball, there's a tube that comes out of it that's designed to hold that frequency and transfer it down a narrow corridor that's lined with circular magnets. And if you look on on that ebook that I referenced, there's actually a picture of a technician constructing one of these satellites. And it looks like it's about 12 to 15 feet tall, and you'll see these large circular magnets. Those magnets are what's used to concentrate and focus that microwave signal that's coming out of that little chamber that I described, okay? Now, what's interesting about it is if you had to repoint and focus the satellite each time that you fired a little microwave bullet, it would never do the job. So what they do is the last ring, the last few rings that are on the end of this satellite can be used to alter the direction that microwave bullet is traveling. And so simply by increasing the current or decreasing the current on any edge of that ring, they can cause it to deflect that microwave bullet just a little bit, and it'll change the direction that it's going in any direction, north, south, east, or west. And it only takes a small amount of electrical current to alter it to make a huge change on where it hits on the ground. I hope everybody's following me. I hope I'm not getting too technical. But if you look
it's okay.
at
It's awesome. It's very much welcome. We don't have too many people. We have a lot of people who come on with theories, no facts, no evidence, or things like that. But maybe they do, that we're not aware of. So a person like you brings credence and credibility, and you're backing it up with information that these are areas you've worked in. So we really appreciate your knowledge.
Okay, and I'm not saying that I'm an expert on these things, but I have studied engineering, and I do know a little bit about satellites and lasers, and the development of microwave energy. So
you worked
again,
yeah, you have that understanding.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so I'm not saying that I'm an absolute expert on all this. I'm telling you, but from an engineering perspective, without getting into the math and stuff like that of how these components work and how they got into orbit in the first place, okay? So basically, the satellites that are being used for this are the satellites that were designed as part of Reagan's Star Wars program. That's what they're using, okay? A lot of people have come up with other ideas, speculated on about what's up there, when they put it up. Just recently, one of the members of the Senate Intelligence Committee proposed that the government need to put up even more satellites to use for anti-ballistic missile tracking and targeting in space, as though the Star Wars Reagan program, those satellites are somehow never made it to orbit or are not operable, but now they're going to go put up some more.
Right.
Most people aren't following the logic of that because they don't know the history of it. But anyway, so I would strongly discourage your senators and congressmen from putting up additional satellites because they're not going to use them on missiles.
Right, because they're already there, more than we even realize. I do believe that, and I don't have evidence of that. But from what I understand, there's probably 5 times more than maybe you or I might even suspect is up there, or that we know for a fact that's up there. So it's, I think the whole satellite thing is quite scary.
Well, it's unfortunate that there are people in our government intelligence agencies that are just this disturbed, that would find either humor or game or political intent out of various forms of torture, and it's disturbing. It reminds me of the Nazis and Dr. Mengele and some of the horrific experiments that were done by him. And some of the later CIA experiments, horrific, grisly science experiments done by Dr. Ewan Cameron, conducted under a CIA program called MKUltra. And anyway, for those that are interested, I encourage you to research and read some of that material. There's a great deal of it available on the internet. So back to a little more of the technical information.
Yes.
So there's literally 2 signals. The tracking signal that's used is basically a bunch of, if you'll look at that ebook again, it's called, one is called Targeted Individuals Technical Information, and that's a rather large ebook that has introductory information. And then I have another book called 34 Patents on Subliminal Mind Control, where I document how this technology has been developed for many years. And then a third book called The Microwave Torture of Ed Snowden and Julian Assange. And of course, neither one of these individuals have come out publicly stating that they are being subjected to this illegal CIA program. But it is my hope and expectation that eventually they will. I think it would be very helpful to many people if they made a public support announcement similar to what William Denny and Kirk Wiebe had done. But let me quickly quickly shift gears and talk about how to jam a signal electronically. A signal can be jammed electronically by simulating the reflected signal so that the received signal is confused. Now, let me try to explain that a different way so folks understand. Let's say I have a laser pointer that you might typically use in a classroom on a chalkboard, and I'm standing at the back of the classroom and I'm pointing this laser at the board, and somebody wants to confuse what's going on, they could get a multi-sided mirror that went in many different directions and hold it up so that once that laser started hitting it, it would just go off in different directions. That's kind of the idea behind jamming a signal electronically, is that the light doesn't get back to the source, so the source doesn't know exactly what they're hitting or what's being targeted. So the basic idea of jamming a signal is to send out another signal that's very similar to the one that's being sent, so that the receiver confuses the location of the signal that was actually sent. Okay? How that's done technically is I've given the location of these two tracking, the tracking signal and the harm signal. And by the way, on the FCC frequency spectrum table, both of these signals are officially identified by the Federal Communications Commission. Both of those frequency bands are identified by the FCC as off limits to everything except satellite-to-ground communications. Let me say that again. The FCC has published documents that are available to anyone online that will clearly state any signal in this range can only come from a satellite in orbit to the Earth on the ground. And that's precisely what both of these signals that I just described are doing. So basically, the FCC has confirmed that these frequencies are used by satellites and nobody else is supposed to be using them, okay, in the United States, okay? So I encourage folks that are interested to look that up, FCC frequency spectrum table. Jamming a signal. In the ebook that I provided, the microwave torture of Ed Snowden and Julian Assange, I identify by model number a piece of electronic equipment that can be used to jam these frequency signals. And I am simply giving one example. It's just one example again. And the device that's used is called a signal generator. And the method for jamming a signal is called sweeping, okay? If you think of a broom sweeping back and forth, that's what this signal generator can do with a signal to jam this frequency spectrum between about 3,500 megahertz and 4,000 megahertz. So I can take one of these electronic boxes called a signal generator and tell it to sweep back and forth as fast as it can between 3,500 and 4,000 megahertz, and it will effectively jam that signal. The satellite will not know the correct location, and it will not know where to target the tracking and location or the harm signal, okay? Now, once you've got that, you could expect what the government criminals are going to do next. They're going to try to use what's called a countermeasure or a countermeasure to either damage or sabotage that signal generator. And it gets more complicated. It's basically a military tactic. So if you acquire a piece of equipment that can generate a signal in the frequency range that I've given and sweep that signal back and forth, what you'll want to do is don't turn it on until you need it. And before you do that, you want to do what's called saving the firmware. You want to save all the software that's on that device before you turn it on and use it, okay? And you want to save that on a device that cannot be deleted. You want to put the right protection on. Like if you're using a USB thumb drive or an SD card, you want to switch it so that the device can't be written on top of. And you want to make multiple backup copies of it, okay? So I'm giving you some of the details that are involved so you get a sense of what can be done to jam these signals, okay? Now, so I encourage anyone that's interested to download my free ebook. It's available on my website, rlighthouse.com. It's also available for free on smashwords.com, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Amazon. Some of my books are available on Amazon.com and other large international websites. The majority of my ebooks are free, and I encourage folks to download them. So search them out and download them. Another important area that I wanted to cover involves the stalking and harassment. There is a handout that is freely available on my website and at smashwords.com and a few other websites that's called the World Trade Center and WTC handout. And I encourage folks to download that and use it. You will find it to be a very effective tool at discouraging stalking. Let me explain to you what's going on. The gang stalking is actually run by the FBI. And how do we know that? The reason we know that is because they control the payment system. And if you'd like to know how the payment system, how the FBI pays these gang stalkers, you can look it up. There's a news article on a website called theintercept.com. Theintercept.com is a website that's a journalistic venture that was started by Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, and a few other highly respected journalists. If you'll do a search on theintercept.com for a news article called FBI Confidential Payments, you'll get that news article, and it describes in detail how the FBI pays these criminals, okay? That's how we know that they're running the program. They do it under different auspices. One of them is called the Citizen Corps. If you've ever done research on that, it's basically a group, in my opinion, and I need to emphasize that. Have I tracked down every person in the Citizen Corps and to determine what their motives are? No, I have not. But it's clear that at least some of them are being used for illegal purposes, in my opinion. I encourage others to research this and make their own, form their own opinions. Now, back to the handout. Why is that handout so helpful? Because the people that they bring into this FBI confidential payment program, generally, the FBI already knows that they're prone to break the law, or they wouldn't have brought them into the program. And you'll find that out when you read that news article. The FBI actually has a policy manual, a procedure manual, that's available right off of that website that you can download. I can't remember. It's a fairly hefty policy and procedure book that's published by the FBI, and it's not supposed to be available to the general public, but it is. They were able to get it as part of the research that these journalists did. But what you find out is, even though some of the people involved in this program aren't highly respectable, they also don't have security clearances, okay? So when you give them a copy of this World Trade Center handout that describes in detail some of the things that happen, these individuals are not supposed to know about that information. And so what you'll immediately notice is the stalking and harassment goes down significantly, because now they're trying to pull all these people out because they're not supposed to know about this information. That's why this handout is so powerful. Stick it on their windshield. If you know where their car is, put it under their windshield wiper. If you know what house it's at, put it on their front door. Put it under the doormat so it's still showing. There's lots of things you can do to deliver that message, and the people that are their handlers, and I use that with quotation marks, are going to pull them out because they're not supposed to have this information, because it makes it clear to them. The information on that one page makes it very clear the corruption that's going on. And keep in mind, these people are not being told the truth. They're being told that they need to stalk these people because they're bad. They've done something bad. okay? As Richard Hoagland, who's a highly respected author, has stated many times, the lie is different at every level. So what they tell congressmen is different than what they tell mayors, is different than what they tell the military folks, is different than what they tell the folks that actually conduct the stalking. The lie is different at every level, okay? You can use that information to your advantage. The weakness is these people don't have a security clearance and they're not supposed to have this information. And even the handlers are not supposed to have this information. So it causes lots of problems for their hierarchy, okay? Now, I encourage any of you to just try that. Is it directly related to this subject matter? No, it's not. But the method is very effective, so I encourage you to try it and see it for yourself. The handout is very clear. If you don't like that handout, you can design and make your own with that information that's available.
You said that was on your website, correct?
Yes, it's just called World Trade Center handout or WTC handout or something like that. It's basically it's multiple pages, but the page that you want to print out is fairly clear, and you can print that out, make as many copies as you want, or cut it out and use it as a handout. And I think you'll find that it's very effective. Two of the websites that I wanted to recommend are biggerthansnowden.com and another one, that's a fairly recent one that's got some really compelling information on it. And another one is called mindjustice.org that is operated by Cheryl Welsh, who's an attorney and a TI. And Cheryl has shied from a lot of publicity and appearances and talks, and is difficult to reach. And I'm wondering if that is not her intention. But at any rate, I do find the information on her website to be fairly credible.
Yeah, I'm familiar with her. We're all very familiar with Cheryl. And Spencer Carter has been around now for about 1.5 years, and he's one of the creators of Bigger Than Snowden. So he's another activist that's pretty well known. So you have two of the good ones, that's for sure. You make references to two very respected sites.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So what else could I cover? Yeah, I know what else I wanted to cover. I think a lot of folks probably have a question on what's the driving force behind this. The National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, is a top secret group that designs the satellites that were put up. So the Star Wars, the Reagan Star Wars satellites were actually designed by a division called the National Reconnaissance Office. They're the guys that design and build those satellites and put out the contracts to build them. So they clearly know what's going on. The CIA works with them and operates those satellites, in my opinion. But the software and the logic for the tracking and control of those satellites remains with the NRO. So I don't have a very positive opinion for folks that work over at the NRO. They're the ones that put those satellites up, and they should. And I'm sure they know very well what they're being used for. Where does the funding come from? Where's the money behind this? In my opinion, I've published an ebook on it called The Rockefellers and the Rothschilds: Dirty Money on the London Stock Exchange. This is, I think, a very important ebook. It's very short. I encourage people to download it. It's free. It's available on lots of websites, like I mentioned before, my website, or lighthouse.com, Amazon, Smashwords, Barnes & Nobles. The bottom line is I've identified a number of stock funds on the London Stock Exchange that are holding hundreds of trillions of dollars in assets. This is not an understatement. You heard that correctly. Hundreds of trillions of dollars. And let me put that in perspective for you. The entire gross domestic product of the United States in 1 year is $18 trillion. Lloyd's Banking Group is one banking stock on the London Stock Exchange, it is worth more than $900 trillion. And it's very clear that the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds are the owners of the majority of the stock in that company. And I could go into details about the Federal Reserve and who are the private companies that own the Federal Reserve. They're basically European companies, and the controlling interest in those companies, more than 51% of the controlling shares in those companies is owned by the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. If you haven't done your research on that, I encourage you to do it. You can download my free ebook, and you can read the value of these stocks right off of the London Stock Exchange. The values have been hidden. And there's a whole story on how I was able to identify these, because the London Stock Exchange won't quote the true market value for these shares. They quote the share price, but what you cannot find is how many shares are actually outstanding. You will find huge contradictions when you look at Barron's, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, the London Stock Exchange itself. Very credible media publications contradict each other as to how many shares are outstanding. And the reason for that is because that information is being manipulated. It's being deliberately manipulated. So I encourage you to look that up. Some of the other stocks that are clearly being used as shell companies to hide their assets are Mitsubishi Electronics, which is a Japanese company held on the London Stock Exchange, more than $300 trillion in assets. The Japanese company Ricoh, Konami, Toyota Motor Corporation on the London Stock Exchange, another one that's extremely valuable. It's huge stock market value. More than $1 quadrillion in Toyota Motor Corporation on the London Stock Exchange. All of these things, the amount of fraud that is involved to manipulate the value in these stocks is staggering. It makes the Enron corruption look like pocket change. This is truly a staggering amount of money. I can't even begin to explain it. I encourage others to look it up and research it for themselves. Download my ebook if you're interested. In my opinion, this is where the money is coming from to fund these illegal CIA and NRO operations. And to them, it's just pocket change. It's literally pocket change. When you're sitting on hundreds of trillions of dollars, to spend a few $1 billion on some satellites is pocket change. It's nothing. So I encourage folks to download that and look it up and do their own research. What other topics would you like to cover, Ella?
Well, these are all great topics. One of the things I think that people ask me, I reach out to a lot of media, and sometimes I go, well, why are they spending so much money on one person? Why all the helicopters? Why all the infraguard? Why are they doing that? It doesn't make sense. That's the comment I get from some of the investigative reporters. And I try to explain how budgets work, but they, do you have maybe you can give me better words to use when I'm trying to convince people of what's going on?
Well, I think they make a good point, and they're on the right idea. What they're missing in that equation is how much money is behind it. When I mean the gross domestic product of the United States on 1 year is $18 trillion, I mean everything. Everything that is bought and sold, the value of all labor, the value of all buildings that are built, the value of all stock exchange transactions, all of that added up in the United States in 1 year is $18 trillion, and the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds are sitting on quadrillions of dollars, hundreds of trillions of dollars in individual stocks. The numbers are staggering. They don't care if they hire every single person in the United States. They can easily afford it. It's still pocket change to them. So why would they do all this? They get people working on their side. And there's literally, they've got unlimited deep pockets to do it. The CIA has been pushing for, and the CIA has an incentive to do it because they build their own empire. If you're a mid-level manager at the CIA and you want to get a bigger bonus and get a promotion and make more money, what do? You tell them you got to have more employees. No, I can't do that without hiring more employees, and I'm going to need a bigger budget. And of course, if I have a bigger budget and more managers to manage, I'm going to need a promotion and a bonus and a raise. They have every incentive to do it. they are incented financially to participate in the corruption.
Okay, you worded that a lot better than I do. Okay, and then another question I get, and this is a question we all wonder, is how can the longevity of these programs? Most people, it seems like a lifetime program. So do you think, other than the money and trying, would a Drake, I talked to Thomas Drake before on the phone at great lengths, and he said, well, to keep the money flowing, you've got to keep the problem going. Is that what you think it is too?
I would think that that's certainly part of the issue. I think the other part, I think the other part of it is, as Richard Hoagland has mentioned, the lie is different at every level. The whole system is not, it can't be explained by one sentence or one statement, because the lie is different at every level. And so talking to your congressman about it is different than talking to foreign governments about it, or talking to mayors and police departments about it. It's a different story, a different issue, and the lie is different. But there are always people that are incentivized to participate, and many of them are paid off by the FBI confidential payments program. That's where the money bag is. For the average person that's on the street, that's not a politician, that's not in the military, that's not in one of the intelligence agencies, the incentives come from the FBI confidential payment system. Now, the FBI has their own incentives, but for a mid-level FBI manager, the incentive is the same. I want a bonus, I want a bigger paycheck, and I want more employees under me. And they've always got incentive to participate in the system, and they've always got an incentive to say, I'm going to need more money and a bigger budget, more employees to do that. And
what about when they're like enlisting neighbors and putting people up in houses close by, or, getting families involved? Do you really think that's necessary? I really don't understand why they go to such great lengths to isolate a target.
I don't pretend to have all of the answers, Ella, but I do think they're experimenting with the limits of subliminal mind control to find out what can and cannot be done, because in my opinion, the end goal is to automate all of this and turn it into a computer program that can target millions of people, not thousands. And they know they can't hire enough people to do that on a long-term basis. They're going to have to come up with some kind of software program that's either using AI or some other that they haven't developed yet, but they're trying to develop the logic and the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities of family members, friends, coworkers, and they're using the technology of subliminal mind control, which I have documented as at least 34 different patents filed in the U.S. Patent Office. And those patents were approved by a group of 6,000 scientists that work for the U.S. Patent Office. So if there was just one or two patents out there, I would say, yeah, I'm not so sure about that technology. It might be a fluke. But with 34 patents out there, and some have been out there for more than 20 years, and they haven't been revoked, that tells me that the technology is real.
And too, with Google and Elon Musk, what he talks about and where this money is going with these, huge tech companies, you can find that information online, even through Google. You can find information on Google and what they're trying to develop, and reading the mind, or, just to to read and to perceive like what a person's looking at, what they're thinking, what they're shopping for, and so that technology is already in the works, and and I think a lot of things are really already implemented. A lot of times we can speculate, but I suspect from my own experience that so many things are already put in place that we just haven't discovered, or that the normal person doesn't even suspect yet. So because we know this technology has been around since World War II. I guess when Project Paperclip came about, they were working on mind control back then, and so they can have only, have perfected and this technology. So it just makes sense to me what you're saying. Perfect sense.
Well, one of the things that I think is important, because there's so much disinformation out there, and that's very deliberate, that there's a significant intelligence agency effort to put out disinformation to distract and discourage and to lead people down dead ends. One of the things that the FBI has done repeatedly is to try to put out information that ELF waves are part of their procedure and protocol that are involved in the stalking and the subliminal mind control issues. In my research, that's fundamentally not true. In fact, it is clearly part of an FBI disinformation campaign. And I'll point out the shooting incident with Myron Mays, where the FBI recovered his shotgun and then took pictures and publicly posted them in the news media, showing that Myron had supposedly etched into the side of the shotgun that this was his ELF weapon, and this is what he was using to get back at the system. And in my opinion, those actions were done by FBI agents, not Myron. It was part of a deliberate disinformation campaign. Harm frequency that's used, that's between 3921 megahertz and 3934 megahertz. That harm signal is also used to send the subliminal mind frequencies. Now, there's a gentleman named Dr. Paul Baccio, who lives in Florida. He's retired. He's a scientist that was formerly working for DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and he's written extensively stating that he was participating in programs to develop, and they discovered that the frequency around 450 megahertz can be used to synchronize and send signals to the brain. Okay? So the way that would work using these satellites that I've described is that 450 megahertz signal would ride, it's called riding on a carrier wave, okay? So the carrier wave is that 3921 megahertz signal, and the 450 megahertz signal rides on that carrier wave. So it delivers that signal. So anytime you jam the carrier wave signal, 3921 megahertz, you're also jamming the subliminal mind control frequency. So that's important information. You only need to jam the one frequency, and then you're jamming all the others that they're using for other purposes. I'm not sure if that'll make sense to people, but if you want to think of it, how, say you get FM 100 on your radio station, and it plays music, right? Well, that music signal runs at around 10,000 hertz, and the frequency that it's carried around is around 100 megahertz, 100 million cycles per second. So it rides on that carrier wave. The music signal rides on that carrier wave and then is subtracted off of that carrier wave to produce sound at your radio, okay? So this is the same kind of setup where the subliminal mind control frequencies around 450 megahertz ride on the primary carrier frequency at 3921. Okay, so when you jam that 3921 frequency, you're also jamming the other subcarrier or sub-frequencies that they're using. Okay, that's important to know.
Right. And well, thank you. That's really good information. Is that why ham radio operators can't operate on those wave lengths? Or I'm not sure what the correct word is.
Well, the ham radios are restricted to operating at certain frequencies according to FCC, yeah. and you can download the FCC frequency table spectrum, and it'll list the specific frequencies that ham radio operators are allowed to use. And
I know 400 they're not allowed to. So
the range in the middle 400s has been reserved. Yes, that is
right.
Not available to. It doesn't mean they can't do it. It just means that they're not supposed to do it.
Right. Okay, well, that's all really great information. So this is a big question. What are some of the steps we can start to take to kind of expose this, and what do you think is going to need to happen long term to kind of get a handle on this?
Well, I think that there's a gentleman by the name of Leibowitz, Dr. Daniel Leibowitz, who did a Senate hearing presentation back in December of 2014, very thorough in my opinion, a presentation where he described the CIA's targeted individual program. He identified motivation, the organizations that are involved, what are the goals and agenda, what are some of the symptoms, what can be done about it. I think certainly one of the first things that can be done is education. You've got to get the information out.
That is the tough part. Let me tell you, that is very difficult.
Well, it's for folks that are so inclined, I encourage you to write. You can start your own blog spot. You can publish ebooks. If you want to publish ebooks under a pseudonym, you can do that. But I encourage you to get the information out in whatever form is possible. John Finch, if you don't want to do it yourself, John Finch regularly puts out his distribution list, I'd say about once a month, and if you'll send him whatever you've got, he'll probably add it to his list and combine it with the send out that he does on a once monthly basis. So there's lots of things that you can do to get information out there. If you've got helpful tips, if you've found certain vulnerabilities or weaknesses in the system, that's always helpful information. FOIA requests are always a red flag for the intelligence agencies. They don't like receiving those because it causes them a lot of problems. So for those that are so inclined, let's say you're living in a small town in Central Texas, and you would like to find out, why a police car is always parked in front of your house or going down your street during certain times of the day. You can put out what's called a Freedom of Information Act request, and you can send it to the local police department. That you're likely to get an answer saying that we didn't find anything on you, we have no information on. You have to submit it as though you were a private individual. It sets off red flags for them, and it creates a firewall that they have to maintain. So it becomes an increased workload for the ones in the office that are crooked versus the ones that are not. And you're going to find that with in my opinion, in any one of these intelligence agencies, you're going to find agents that are still above reproach, and you're going to find some agents that would sell out their grandmother. So by adding to their workload, you create problems for them. And one of the ways you can do that is by sending out FOIA requests. You can send FOIA requests to the FBI, to the CIA, to your local police department, to your local city council. You can tell them what's going on, and you can tell them what you're looking for. That there's several things that you can do there. But FOIA requests are helpful because it creates a permanent public record that anybody can access, and that some of the crooked folks have to try to maintain a firewall around. So it creates workload for them. Okay, so that can be a helpful thing as well. Education, FOIA requests, contacting your politicians, all of those things are certainly helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And then, there's so many, it seems like we hit walls a lot of times. We're just trying to figure out how to get around some of them. And I live in Oregon. We have Senator Ron Wyden, and if I had faith in any government official, it would be in him. But I know still his hands are tied, or I don't know what happens as far as, we know he's getting all the important information from all the people who are credible and believed, and they've, and then they've returned my phone call, and they say we're going to investigate it, but of course you don't hear anything back. So I guess all we can do is just keep trying, and try different approaches.
Yeah, any way that you can contact them, call them, would I think be certainly helpful. Yeah, and I think it would also be helpful I noticed you've got a conference in Boston that's coming up in October. Yeah, I would announce that wide and far. That's a great way for folks to interact and exchange information.
Yeah, that's headed by a woman named Allison. I got to give her credit for that. Her and a lot of the people that we have in the Northeast group and the East Coast that are doing that. So, yeah, we're very appreciative of that, and that will be a big event, and we will do that. We will promote that. I think that's a good angle to take. As well as we're trying to get people interviews like with Sean Stone, like I had emailed you earlier about, and trying to get some documentaries made and doing everything we can. And the great thing is when people like you come on, you're able to educate us in a way that we're able to speak more intelligently because a lot of people are not technically minded, including myself. So I think it's very important for people like you to come on and share your information. And I really appreciate that you're offering so many books free. I love what you said on the phone. You said, I don't want to make money off people suffering. So I appreciate all the free books you're offering our community and other people.
Oh, thank you. I hope it helps some folks.
Yeah, and then once the general public starts to wake up a little bit and they see what's going on, what do you think at that point? Have you thought it through that far, like what's going to happen at that point? Because I know Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe, as you know, are doing a global TI survey. So if anyone's listening online, that's something you should participate in. If you're a targeted individual, it's the global TI survey, and you can research it online, guys, if you're listening to this. And so I know they want to take some of the statistics, some of the data and the statistics they come up with, and first they want to take it to so we can get help. People need doctors, we need therapy and different things like that. We need police. Be able to, if we call for help, people need to get help instead of being misdiagnosed or thought of as delusional, whatever the case may be. And then I know eventually they want to go, and they want to expose it to the public as well, and then they eventually will take it to the political arena. So that's probably what really needs to happen.
Yes, I agree. It's certainly part of the education and information process. One of the interesting things I read about some of the intelligence agencies' statistical analysis. They very involved. They have entire groups that analyze data, and one of the things that they decided on a long time ago, and I'm not sure it's statistically valid, but it tells you how they think. They believe that if less than 1.5% of the population is aware of any event or idea, that eventually it will be hidden historically, if that makes any sense. So, in other words, as long as they can suppress information to less than about 1.5% of the population, it will never grow beyond that, and the other 98.5% of the population will think that there's something wrong with these people.
Right.
But once it gets above 2%, once more than 2% of the population is aware of any particular event or issue, it becomes like a domino effect. There's no way to shut it down or stop it. It will organically grow on its own through information sharing. And I think they did this kind of statistical analysis back in the 60s and 70s. So with the internet now, I think that would completely diverge that statistical analysis. So it might be good news that they're making decisions and opinions based on poor statistics, and that actual percentage is a much lower number that goes into the domino effect. And so I'm of the opinion that it's already past that point, that things like the World Trade Center and the false flag operations that are going on around the world are well above the 2% level now, and will easily be distributed to people that want to know, that are curious, that want to know what's going on. They don't trust the mainstream news anymore, so they're going to alternative media, and not all of that is good or positive. I mean, there's lots of very disreputable information that's published in the alternative media, in my opinion, but at least it's not controlled news and controlled information.
Right. There is a lot of disinformation and lofty ideas that aren't backed up by, evidence, or so there is some of those, issues. So even like when TIs go on, or target individuals, in case someone's listening doesn't know what a TI is. They go on to these shows and maybe they're talking about an alien abduction or whatever the case may be. Sometimes that can be really discrediting. And not to say, there might be alien life out there, but you do want to come from a very credible, angle. So it can be really challenging, especially because what we're dealing with is so hard for a person to wrap their mind around. It's already extremely challenging and so easy to write someone off as delusional, especially the symptomology that people are experiencing while they're being targeted. The paranoia, the PTSD and the trauma, and just what they're trying to convey to people. I think it's so difficult, especially for targeted individuals. I think they just really have the biggest uphill battle out of all these different groups of people and news coming out, But like you say, it's starting to maybe go beyond that 1% or whatever the case may be, and so and people don't trust mainstream. What is it? Isn't it controlled by, like, all the news that comes into America is controlled by 3 corporations, or maybe even one family at this point? Is that true? Do you know that statistics on that?
I have read something similar that major news media. William Colby, who's a former director of the CIA, made a very famous statement back in the 1970s, I believe, where he stated that the CIA controls every significant figure in the major news media. And that was back in the 1970s. And don't quote me on this, but I believe the way that story went is that Henry Kissinger immediately went to President Nixon and demanded the resignation of William Colby. He was absolutely outraged that he had let that information out. I don't have the details on that. I believe that may have come from a book that was written about from different sources, and we're just now piecing the puzzles, putting the pieces of that puzzle together. But there's a lot of disinformation, unfortunately, about that single statement because it's been so powerfully negative on the intelligence agencies to know that the director of the CIA was the first person that wanted to discredit him, basically. And so the circumstances surrounding his death were highly suspicious, and I won't even go on all that. If you're interested, look it up. William Colby. It's on Wikipedia and some other sources. But very quickly, I wanted to touch on one subject, technical, that may help folks that are out there that are technically oriented, that are looking for ways to divert, block, or jam the signals, and it has to do with the voltage. I didn't cover this before, but the voltage on these signals, I have measured. Again, I had three people that informed me that they were targeted individuals, and I had extensive conversations. I took measurements. What I found is the voltage is actually quite low. It varies from 1 to 10 millivolts. And for those that are interested, you can buy what's called a multimeter at Home Depot or Walmart. The analog versions of these multimeters are even under $10. And you can buy what's called a banana plug to alligator clip. And it's a piece of wire. You generally have to buy them separately because you can't get it like that. But the multimeter has 2 jacks on it that the wire is input with what's called a banana plug. And it's a type of connection that plugs into the multimeter. And on the other end of that wire, you want what's called an alligator clip. And in between that alligator clip, you can put a thin strip of aluminum foil, and you can take measurements, voltage measurements. Those measurements will vary. The measurements that I took varied between about 1 to 10 millivolts, 1 being barely felt and 10 being extremely painful. So, and this is the feedback that I got. that voltage is important to an engineer because voltage can be grounded, okay? And the way you ground a voltage is by using a much higher voltage. And I'll give you an example. For example, a taser uses a very high voltage, above 100,000 volts. And what that does is disrupt all the electrical signals in a person or a dog or something else, and renders them temporarily incapacitated. But you can do the same thing with objects as well. If you want to overwhelm the electronics in a laptop, put a taser on it. It will fry the electronics in a laptop very quickly. So what we're dealing with is a low voltage signal, and we know from the basic theories of physics that it should be possible to ground that out with a much higher voltage signal. And what we're dealing with that's different, because the first thing that I read about that folks tried was what's called using an EMF cage, or an electromagnetic frequency cage. It's basically where you wrap something or even a person in a metal cage such that it conducts the frequency or the electricity around the person and rather than through it. And what they found is that these EMF cages didn't work, and they couldn't understand why they didn't work, because NASA uses those to protect satellites. That's how they harden satellites in orbit, to protect them from nuclear detonation in what's called a pulse EMF that will disable a satellite. The way they protect the electronics in the satellite is by surrounding it with a special sealed metal box that will take the electricity and keep it away from the electronics that are inside of it. And what they were confused by is, why didn't an EMF cage work? And the reason has to do with the way the frequency is being generated and the amount of energy that's involved. Okay, so the energy on these microwave bullets, if I can call it that, can be turned up to a very high level, such that they can go through about 50 feet, I would estimate, of concrete and steel, or about 50 feet of earth. But it does have limitations. And if you want to discover the limitation, go into a downtown building that's 30, 40, 50 stories tall, and either go into the first floor or go into the basement, and you will notice, and I've been told, you will notice a huge difference right away. The frequency can't reach you. And so it's reached its upper limit. And beyond that, I have been told that there are TIs that go and try to check into hotels and hide in hotels, and then they'll send out one or two guys in a van with a little portable unit to harass you. But the point is that there are limits to the technology. It can't penetrate beyond a certain point. I've been told that there are TIs that are hiding in the foothills of West Virginia, because there's lots of caverns and caves that have more than 50 feet of earth above them, and it becomes a natural shelter. There's apparently lots of places you can do that. So the voltage, the reason the voltage is important is because in theory it can be grounded out. It may be something as simple as using a pan of water that's got several inches of water in it, and let me caution everyone to an extreme amount here. What I'm describing is potentially dangerous and can shock you and can harm you greatly. So unless you know what you're doing, get an electrical engineer or an electronics technician to help you. Don't try to do this on your own, okay? But a pan of water that's metal, that's carrying an electric current, in theory can ground out these microwave bullets, okay? And that's one potential scenario. Another potential scenario is what's called a barrier layer. And this basically involves, if you can imagine taking kind of an S shape with aluminum foil or metallic fabric, mylar even, and make it sort of an S shape that continues in an S shape. And you put layers in it and then compress those layers together and put insulators between where the S curves, and I'm not sure I'm describing this very well, but basically it creates one piece of fabric with lots of layers to it or levels to it, okay? And when you put an electrical current through that runs at a very high voltage, say 1,000 volts or more, it will ground out the majority of that microwave bullet, if not all of it, okay? And there's several different ways that can be done. One is with a portable battery jump start system. They sell them at Walmart. They're like a couple $100. Another method involves a transformer, and electronics engineers will know how to assemble this, but you basically step up the voltage that's taken out of your household current, and you can step it up as high as you want with these multiple transformers to where it gets up to 1,000, 5,000, or even 10,000 volts. And that voltage is so much greater than the millivolts that the signal is operating at that it will tend to ground out the signal, okay? Now, again, I'm giving suggestions and ideas, and I want to emphasize again, unless you know what you're doing, you can electrocute yourself. So you would be dealing with high voltage currents and high amperage currents, and let me emphasize, it can be very dangerous. So get someone that you know that it could be an electrician, an electrical engineer, an electronics expert to help you. Don't try to do that by yourself, okay? And I hope that some of that information is helpful.
Yeah, it sounds, I'm sure a lot of people get something out of it. And even if, like I said, people that aren't technically inclined, there's other people in the community that might be able to direct us in the right direction. So, okay, well, thank you. I think, all the shielding and, in your knowledge of electronics is going to be really, really helpful to the community. So, okay. And I think I had a few more questions. And then if it's okay with you, maybe I can open up the floor and let other people ask you some questions.
Sure, that's great.
Let's see. Oh, and then I guess the surveillance. What about, not only is it just, targets that are surveilled, but all, the entire population seems to be surveilled. What kind of safeguards do you think we should take in order to kind of protect ourselves as far as privacy goes, or just assume that we have to give that up and just don't even bother trying?
Well, that's certainly a valid question, Ella. I would recommend. I know that some people, like Laura Poitras, she refuses to carry a cell phone. I mean, that's one solution. Other things that you can do. There's other simple things that you can do. For example, on your computer is using the Tor browser. Ed Snowden had some very good recommendations in that area. Always using encrypted connections that use HTTPS. The S on the end indicates that it's been encrypted. That makes it much more difficult to hack into. There's a number of things you can communicate with encrypted messaging applications that are available for your iPhone and Android. One of them is called Signal, and there's a number of them out there. But if you're so inclined to use those, they can be helpful. Right.
Okay. Well, thanks for that input. Okay, so I guess I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor, and I'm going to come to my activism partner. Matthew, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Hi, Matthew.
Hi, Richard. Thank you so much for giving us all that information and writing prolifically about our issues. I had 3 quick questions on the satellite-based targeting. I just want to say at the beginning, in my particular targeting case, I collected evidence. I can't say that it's 100% validated evidence, but I collected evidence and eyewitness accounts of my own that my particular case of targeting was very much in close and using ground-based weapons, and I knew some of the perpetrators. I mean, that's at least my conclusion. And so I think that the idea of targeting and the technologies using microelectronics to kind of cobble together homemade versions of these things is out there too. That's just how I saw my targeting. I was able to escape it the day that I fled and got away from that harassment network physically by fleeing Canada. That was the last day that I was targeted so far. And the satellite idea is one that I'm really intrigued about, but from my perspective, it's just intractable for me as an individual to kind of think about how that works because I don't have any inside information. And so because you're an expert on this, it's rare to hear people who actually know about the satellite technology. So I had 3 questions about that for you, and if you don't mind, 3 quick questions. One is on the targeting or the tracking signal. One is on the harm signal or the attack signal, and then I had one on atmospheric effects. So I guess I'll start with the targeting phase. You said that the space-based weapons use some kind of a ring of an electronic ring that currents are run through different parts of that, and that does slight deflections on the attack signal. So sorry, I'm starting with the attack signal. Is that what you said, that there's like a ring that current runs through and that deflects the signal slightly?
Yes, there's actually a photograph on my ebook, the microwave torture book. There's a photograph of there actually constructing one of these satellites that I got from Dr. Judy Wood's website, and you can see the large concentric rings, and these rings are actually electromagnets. Okay.
Okay.
What they do is they focus the microwave signal that comes out of the microwave resonator cavity that are kind of random. And by using these circular magnets, it focuses them into a very narrow, straight line, basically. And they can intensify the magnetic current in those rings to make the size of the bullet, if I can call it that, can be as small as, say, a pinpoint, or as large as they want to make it. And of course, as it gets smaller and smaller, that energy gets focused in a more narrow, pointed manner, and it becomes more hurtful. So the more pointed they make it, the more it hurts. And the bigger they make it, say if it's the size of a quarter or a pencil or something like that, it will have less pain associated with it. But it can still be used, that same frequency can still be used to deliver subliminal messages and subliminal frequencies. So that's the harm signal.
Okay, well,
so
actually
a wider beam. Yeah,
sure. I'll take a look at your website. But a wider beam, one that's a few centimeters across, if it was pulsed the right way, could be very harmful because it would cover, say, your heart or much of your brain. So, but I get what you're saying. The energy would be distributed over a wider cross section in that case. So basically, I guess these rings are like inducing a magnetic field by running current around the ring. And so my follow-up question on that is, you hear a lot about people using magnets on their end, on the target end. And so static magnets, what are your feelings on the use of static magnets to deflect the field close to the target? Is that a viable solution for the target to do to help them shield themselves?
It can be helpful, and here's what someone could do if they're in that situation. What you actually would want is moving magnets, not static magnets. Mm-hmm. Moving magnets will, for example, and the moving magnets that you can buy at online or at Harbor Freight Tools or sometimes at Walmart, they're called they're exotic metal magnets, and they're very neodymium. is that neodymium magnets are they're about 10 times stronger than an ordinary magnet. And if you put those on a string or on something such that they're simply moving and free to move in the air, like you can put them close to a fan so that the fan constantly moves them around, that's what makes it really difficult for them to target a specific point. Now, I've had extended conversations with someone in another state that has described how they have targeted, and I won't say exactly where, but just relentlessly a single point. And what she found is that she could hang these magnets from her ceiling on a string, and it would deflect the signal and cause enough of a disturbance that they couldn't consistently hit the same point. And she was able to get some relief from that.
I was thinking about attaching magnets to the blades of a fan or something like, or hanging the strings off of a ceiling fan so that the movement would be more chaotic. That was just an idea that I had once.
That's a good idea. You're thinking in the right direction there. That might be very effective. There's lots of variations that you can do on that make it very difficult to target a single point. And without targeting a single point, their system is not going to be very effective. So it should provide some relief for you.
Okay, great. Question number 2 was on the targeting or the target locking signal. I think you said that was also a microwave signal that was allocated for satellite use only?
That's correct. The frequencies that I've measured are around 3650 megahertz, and if you'll download my first ebook, it's called Targeted Individuals Technical Information, I've got a number of pictures that I took of my signal analyzer while it was gathering the data, and you can see the frequencies, the strength of the signal measured in decibels, and you can see the slight variation between one picture and the next to get an idea of the range that they're covering with those frequencies. But it's a free book. Download it and take a look at those pictures, and you'll see specifically what frequency is being used. Now, I need to emphasize these are satellite frequencies for folks that might be affected by drones. My understanding is in the UK they prefer to use drones, and that the drones use different frequencies, so that it may not be applicable to them. The technology that I'm specifically addressing here tonight has to do with the satellites.
Is there anything to keep the perpetrators of these crimes from using a satellite frequency in order to trick the target into thinking that it was coming from a satellite?
Theoretically, yes. There's lots of different ways you can.
I mean, they would be liable to being prosecuted for that if they were doing that. But I'm just kind of thinking. But the main question I wanted to ask was, the targeting signals are basically doing a bounce off of their target, and the return is how the satellite locks onto the target. Is that correct?
Essentially, that's correct, Matthew.
Okay.
The reflected signal is how they can tell where you're at. Your body is made. Think about it. The ground is made out of dirt and concrete and steel, and buildings are made out of wood and sheetrock, and you're mostly made out of water. Okay.
Right.
So
right.
when a microwave bullet hits you, it's mostly absorbed. It has very specific reflected signal where they can tell some of it gets absorbd. Now,
right, they could tune it. Mm-hmm.
Right. So
they could tune the signal to pick up what a type of material, like a biological material versus background Earth. I can totally see that, but I was just wondering if your understanding of this technology required anything more special than that, like the target having some kind of a technology that was put on them in order to be able to track them. But you're saying that it's just high resolution, basically microwave optics, basically, or like microwave radar optics that are tracking, locking onto an individual and then following that individual.
Essentially, yes, and I think you're on the right direction there, Matthew. That early on, it's apparent that the radio frequency chips were used extensively. There's a number of very clear-cut cases where these chips were manufactured. They even identified the companies that were making them, and there are a number. I can't think of the people's names right off the top of my head, but clearly, early on in this process, they were using chip implants. The opinion of Dr. John Hall in his most recent book is that the majority of the new cases, the recent cases, there's no chip implant whatsoever. These people are being, the ones that are being tracked and targeted by satellites, you don't have to have a chip implant. There's no, similar to the ones that they put into pets for tracking, things like that. No chip is needed. The technology is such that it simply tracks the reflected waves. These little bullets are shot out about 20 to 50 times a second, and they can put them in whatever pattern they want that allows them to be able to tell when you've moved. And I've got a diagram in that third ebook that describes how that works in the most simplest of terms. Now, again, I can't say specifically how they're doing it. I'm trying to describe in general terms how that technology can be done, and it's not complicated. That's the point that I'm trying to make out of, that it's not complicated to do this.
It's not complicated. It just requires really sophisticated and expensive technology. But it seems in that scenario, it seems to me that if a target was locked on by that system, you could potentially, for periods of time, escape from that being locked on. For example, let's say you went into Penn Station, or let's take Penn Station as an example, totally crowded with people and underground, and you mixed with a bunch of people, the system would lose you, and then they would have to use human intelligence and other sources of information to pick you back up again when you were in a more exposed position.
That's possible. I would agree. I should mention your earlier statement about using that your perpetrators were in close contact. There's a CIA agent by the name of Carl Clark who's on the website Bigger Than Snowden, and Carl was involved with. He was one of the perpetrators, and he describes how they use triangulation on the ground to track individual people and then to use these miniature weapons on the ground to assault them. And when he left the program, he became a targeted individual. He decided that the program was just horrific and irresponsible in so many ways, and he left the program, and of course it got turned on him. But you can find him on Bigger Than Snowden, and he describes exactly what you're describing. They were using triangulation on the ground using handheld instruments.
Yeah, I think now there's a variety of different types of targeting. But the last question on the satellites, because again, I'm really intrigued by that, and that's clearly one of the possibilities that we're up against. And there's very little that a person on the ground can do against that. So it's a very frightening prospect. But the third question I had has to do with I think another sort of limitation or caveat that comes to mind when you think about the satellite targeting are atmospheric effects. And I'm not saying I'm an expert on this. I've just read a little bit about it. But I know that with solid state lasers and infrared lasers and maybe chemical lasers, more in like the visible light range, used as military directed energy weapons, they have there's a limitation to the precision of those because of a blooming effect, where as it passes through the atmosphere, the beam heats the atmosphere and actually changes the refractive nature of it, and the beam degrades. And they use I think they've had some advancements in adaptive optics that sort of monitor the beam, and using these mirrors, they they're constantly kind of shaping the beam to keep it straight. So when you're coming from a satellite and you're going through a huge amount of atmosphere, especially on a cloudy day, maybe the microwave bullets don't have that effect, and maybe there's some frequencies that are less susceptible to that effect than visible light or infrared would be. But do you know anything? Can you make any comments on atmospheric effects from the microwave targeting?
Sure. Again, I'll refer listeners to my ebook, and I've got a diagram on there. If you can imagine, I'll try to describe it visually. If you can imagine looking down on the top of a person's head, and let's say you put a simple clock face on the top of their head. So you've got 12, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. If you can imagine that in your head.
Yep.
Now, let's just say, and this is oversimplified, but I think it'll get the point across. They're going to send a microwave bullet down at 12, 3, 6, and 9, 12, 3, 6, and 9, and they'll do that many times every second.
Right.
And even with atmospheric distortion, as long as they're getting the reflected signal, the only thing they need to worry about is pointing the harm signal in the center of all of those reflected signals, even with the atmospheric distortion. So it automatically compensates. Does that make sense?
That's okay. That makes a lot of sense. That's ingenious, actually. So the problem is solved by having a separate targeting signal and a harm signal, and they both follow the same distortion path. So that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
I'd never thought about that before. That's a different situation from what I've read about military weapons that are used to disable drones and whatnot with visible light or lasers, basically. They never talked about there being a separate targeting signal, or I guess also in that case, because it's a fixed beam, the beam actually loses a lot of power because the beam causes its own distortion in the air. But with very short duration pulses, you also might get around that problem too.
Well, yeah, because you can't really compare lasers and microwaves. It's not really it's not apples to apples. Lasers are highly distorted in the atmosphere, and in fact, the higher the frequency that you go, in general, the higher frequency that you go on the electromagnetic spectrum, the more the atmosphere absorbs it. Okay, and so
right.
Between the frequencies of light are something like 300 terahertz, and the frequencies that we're talking about that are being used by these satellites are around 3,000 to 4,000 megahertz. So you're many orders of magnitude in a lower frequency, and the atmospheric effects, in theory and in general, are going to be less. So
right, no, that makes sense. That's why the really low frequency stuff is great for super long range applications.
Yeah, and I do agree there are atmospheric effects, and I'm not an expert on all the issues related to atmospheric distortion and thermal heating in the atmosphere, and there's so many different issues there, technical issues there that I'm sure are very interesting, but why anyone would want to use them for what they're using for is what becomes incomprehensible.
I agree with that. Well, I'll turn it over to other callers. I'm sure there's a lot of questions for you, and thanks again for all your great information.
Okay, thank you, Matthew.
Okay, bye.
Okay, I'm going to come down to Pirate Mikey. That's your handle, also known as Mike. Hi, Mike. Sometimes they have their phone on mute, so we have to give it just a second. Mike?
Yes.
Hi, there you are.
Good. How are you tonight?
Doing all right. Glad to hear your voice.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad somebody's glad to hear my voice. I told Sophie she can't have any more treats tonight. She doesn't want to hear anything from me. But that's all right. How are you?
Doing well. So, yeah,
All right.
so I have Richard on. I'm sure you have a question for him.
Yes, I do. I have a couple questions for him. First of all, I wanted to know, does he realize that the what they call, going back to the SDI part of his speech, and the use of HARP. HARP, he must realize, is actually what they refer to as an ionospheric heater. All right, by altering the various charged particles in the ionosphere, various layers of the ionosphere, correct? And that part of the mystery behind all that was that it was partially used to alter somewhat the magnetosphere, and actually help to render the ascending ICBMs, the intercontinental ballistic missiles of our enemies, inert because it affected their guidance systems. Much the way he was talking about how the geostationary satellites are also were set up to try and disable their guidance systems as well. Being that these things are not over-the-horizon type devices and their line-of-sight devices, and they were designed to disable those portions of the missiles, how does it then transpose to humans who are actually on the ground, have no metal or metallic parts or any kind of guidance systems that would be susceptible to something like that, and also have the advantage of the latency period between satellite communication, between the satellite sensors and the target sensor, supposedly from the satellite to ground and back? And what about the very fact that they being geostationary, that cloud cover alone would not be able to benefit us? That's my first question.
Okay, I think I can answer at least part of that. I first have to say I know a little bit about the HARP technology, but I'm not. I am far from being an expert on that ground-based system.
Yes, sir.
I understand it operates around 30 megahertz and lower. It's a very low frequency system.
Yes, sir.
And I can't say that I'm much of an expert on that system. I know that Dr. Nick Begich in Alaska has spoken extensively about it, so I would reference him as being a possible good source of information.
No problem. And my second. All right, just one other quick thing. In the early 2000s, I was dumb enough to be one of those people to take a microwave, actually more than one microwave oven, and take it apart with a friend of mine. And we took the magnetrons and used all the capacitors and diodes and whatever, because we wanted to see how much of a potential weapon it was feasible that one could make from it. And because we had to have a waveguide that was actually of metal with no magnets, because the frequency and the output was not that great, we were able to use like a conical or funnel-shaped waveguide. And since we only had I'm not a scientist, so I was kind of fearful of microwaves, as people should be in that state. We used 3 separate magnetrons, and the wattage actually was, I think, 6,000 watts total, and that we used through a metallic waveguide and a series of capacitors and etc. And we were able, actually, at that point, to toast pretty heavily, toast out of commission an old Nokia cell phone. But the point that I'm trying to make is that the waveguide necessary, because microwaves are not a self-contained. They don't come in a self-contained form. They have to be guided, because even if you know the construction of a microwave oven, the fan within the microwave oven is there to propagate the microwaves within that space, so that it will try and cook your food a little bit more thoroughly along with the turntable. How would a satellite system then be able to have these kind of microwave systems guided down to individuals, and also taking into consideration the latency period from satellite to ground and back?
That's a good question, Mike. I think you were working in the right direction. I mean, trying to understand a microwave by breaking it down into its components. The waveguides have varying degrees of effectiveness. We know there are specific mathematical equations that you can use that will tell you the optimal size and shape of a waveguide to minimize the losses that are associated with it. But that doesn't mean that you have to use that size of a waveguide. You can use one that's a different size. It just won't be as efficient in carrying that energy. Does that make sense?
Of course, right. But I'm saying with my little project, which also caused fire, burned a piece of drywall in the process. But with my little project, even at about 10 or 12 feet with an old Nokia cell phone, nothing against Nokia, it was a great phone. But I needed 6,000 watts, okay, for that little experiment because of the distance and what I had tried to do. So what I'm trying to say is that the distance that you're talking about from satellite to ground would require a great deal more, right?
Well, it involves focusing.
Right.
You're right.
How would that power not be amenable to detection? Because a lot of times, as you were saying, it would have to be line of sight or almost line of sight to the targets that it was trying to acquire in a geostationary orbit.
Well, precision pointing, and I'll probably sound like a broken record here, but in my third ebook on microwave torture, there is specific diagrams that show how the technology works and how it can track a person or persons on the ground. There's also a picture that I got from Dr. Judy Wood's website that actually shows one of these satellites being constructed, and it involves very large concentric magnets that focus the microwave energy down to as narrow a point as you want, or as big, if they can make it very wide. So you're saying that
it's somewhat almost like the little magnetron out of an oven, that there are certain types of magnetic fields that are used as waveguides to a certain degree.
Well, yes. I don't know the details of their design, but certainly coming out of the magnetron cavity, you're going to have a waveguide that feeds into these large concentric magnets that they can use to focus the beam and polarize the beam so that all of the energy is in a unique wavelength and in a very specific. It's so precisely pointed in the center of those concentric rings that there's no stray signal. And then they can also tweak the current in the electrical magnets on the exit side, on the exit plane, such that it can bend or curve the signal slightly in one direction, north, south, east, or west, so that many targets can be tracked simultaneously. They don't have to repoint the satellite, in other words. Simply by tweaking the electrical current on that exit plane, you can disturb it just enough to point it at a slightly different target in the ground, whether it's a few inches or a few miles. But it doesn't require moving the satellite to achieve that.
Oh, no, I didn't think it would be. Of course not. It wouldn't be, since it's, of course, geostationary, and you'd. Right, and I haven't looked at your ebooks. I probably will have to now after talking with you. But I thank you for your time.
Okay, and I did want to answer your satellite latency latency at the speed of light. The geostationary satellites are about 22,000
right.
nautical miles
about 35,000 kilometers. Right, 22,000 miles. Yeah.
And the speed of light is about 186,000 miles per second, yes. Or about it can travel 18,000 miles in 1/10 of a second. So yes. The latency is roughly 1/10 of a second. Does that make sense? So it takes 1/10 of a second from the satellite to the ground to be reflected back up. It's 2/10 of a second.
Right.
So even a person running on the ground cannot go very far in 2/10 of a second. Yeah. If they're firing these tracking microwave bullets at 20 to 30 or 50 times a second,
right?
Even if you move 1 inch, it can still track you. And it was designed. Keep in mind,
right. That's actually the answer I'm looking for. I know that, and it was just in passing. And the final thing is that I'm curious about how mitigating is cloud cover in something such as this.
Well, obviously not much, or people would say all they have to do is get under a cloud and they're hidden. So clouds are basically moisture, but not the level of water content that's in your body. So
I know. I would hope that there would be some way that people could eventually locate or be able to get some validation that they were being used as by studying the patterns of cloud cover or disruption of cloud cover, but that doesn't seem possible, really.
Well, I mean, you bring up some interesting questions, and again, I don't know all the details. I know a little bit as an engineer, and that's the part.
You know a lot about it more than I do. I just had I'm not even that, sir. But I just thought I would ask. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, and I appreciate your question, Mike.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ella? Hello. If we got anybody else on.
Sorry, Richard. I had it on mute. That happens sometimes. I just happen to forget. I have a sham. It's a little busy at home, so I try to mute out the noise. Anyways, I forgot to mute it. Apologize. Okay, Tide, I'm going to come to you. Hi.
Hey, Ella. It's Tide. Hi.
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 Hi. So I have a couple questions. I mean, I read some fascinating stuff. You're talking about the antimatter, on and off kind of switch, right? That's fascinating. But more to the point, some simple stuff, right? I'm new to this, and I live with my family. They're away now, but my wife and child are coming back in a couple weeks, and I'm concerned about the effect on my family will have if I live under the same roof, kind of thing. Can you just comment on that? What you think?
Well, I think one of the best references that I would recommend reading as far as some of the things that happen with families is Dr. John Hall's latest book. He goes into great lengths about some family situations that he experienced, and can give you some examples of what can and cannot be done. I'm not sure I could cover. I certainly don't know the specifics of your situation, but I would recommend his book, and I would recommend John Finch puts out a summary of about 100 different individuals where they each describe their own situation. Some of them are families, and you can get a sense of what can and what cannot be done. And I think you might.
Can and cannot be done is to mitigate, or what they can do to you, kind of thing, like the rules.
Both. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's basically a series. John Finch puts out a series of stories of examples that, and these stories were written up by the people that experienced them. And I would say that it's helpful information in that if you know what to expect, it's certainly less surprising, and you're as a minimum mentally prepared for it. And so I would say I would encourage you to do it if for no other reason than to be mentally prepared and look for support. I mean, this group is certainly one avenue for support. And I would encourage, if you can attend the Boston conference in October, I think you might find that helpful as well.
Yeah, I'm going to try to do that. Are you targeted now with directed energy weapons kind of thing?
I can't. There's certain details I can't go into, and it's because I have pending litigation, and so my attorneys have advised me not to go into certain subjects. The subjects that I can discuss are my research and technical issues, but that's going to be an example of an area that I have been advised not to discuss.
Okay.
Now, without discussing the details of your thing, is there a framework that we can follow, perhaps, or a pattern that we can use to get to the point where? So basically, let me frame it this way: if I take a look at your books specifically on different frequencies, because that's that's quite insightful. That's a really good start. Will I be able to, using that information, be able to gather some data so that I can move forward and perhaps trying to get out of this program via the legal system kind of thing? Is that a good way?
I would say the first thing is probably just to educate yourself as much as you can. I think that there are legal avenues that are opening up. I don't know that there's one specific legal avenue or recommendation that I could give you. And first of all, I'm not an attorney, but I would say stay in touch with people that are in the know. Cheryl Welch is an attorney. There are a number of folks that have come out as TIs that are also attorneys that can certainly give a legal perspective. I would say mine is more of a technical and a technology perspective, but that I try to limit myself to where my expertise is. I wouldn't pretend to advise somebody on the law.
Okay, sure, got it. You mentioned about the satellites and microwaves and stuff like that. My understanding is that microwaves can't penetrate the atmosphere. Is that not the case?
Say that again?
Microwaves cannot penetrate, can't get through the atmosphere.
No, actually, microwaves. Microwaves can very much penetrate the atmosphere, but you bring up a good point that microwaves, as a term, encompasses a very broad spectrum in the frequency spectrum, and lower frequencies are not as absorbed as much as the higher frequencies in general. Now, you could get into some of the research books, and they've actually got what are called absorption tables, and you can see a chart basically of frequency versus absorption in the atmosphere, and it differs. There is no one formula that works for all frequencies. There's different things. The atmosphere, moisture, different chemicals will absorb certain frequencies, so there's many different effects. There's no one general formula that you can use that covers all of it. So you do bring up a good point there, but microwaves can move through the atmosphere, and even those frequencies that are highly absorbed in the atmosphere, if you want to put a big energy behind them, a big punch behind them, they'll go through it too. So it's really more about how much energy you put behind it rather than a specific frequency. I'm not sure if I answered your question there. But.
You did. And, I'm sorry, one more. I'm sorry to keep you on. But somebody's made a comment yesterday or the day before, a couple days ago, about how they were talking about a zone in Mexico where, there's no activity. It's called zona de silencio, like the silent zone. Now, I'm wondering if somebody mentioned that if you're away, in other words, does the system work like this? Do they capture your pattern of your brain somehow, and then if you're away for 6 weeks, does that kind of erase from the system? Is that a possibility? Does your brain pattern change over time? Do you have any idea about that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wouldn't have an expertise in the area of brain waves and brain patterns, but I'm sure that's an interesting area of research. I'm sorry, say that again?
How they find you, how they locate you, kind of thing.
Well, I've kind of covered that, at least from a microwave technology. I've got a few diagrams there. In the third ebook, it's called Microwave Torture of Ed Snowden and Julian Assange. And I try to make it as simple as possible, but there are a number of diagrams and illustrations, and I've tried to explain each one in simple terms. And it's free. I recommend you download it if you have a few minutes. I think you'll find it fairly informative. It's not intended to be all-encompassing. I haven't tried to answer every question. I've just tried to answer some of the basic questions of how the technology works and what frequencies that it uses.
Great. Thanks very much for all your advice and your expertise.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay.
Now I'm going to come up to Melinda. Melinda Fee.
Yes, hi.
Hi there. How are you, Melinda?
Yes, so, Ella. Really quickly, this is sort of interesting. I've got a leg sore that they gave me, quote unquote. The skin was just open one morning from no trauma or anything, and it's very, very painful. And I will have it go to the doctor, and they'll change the dressing and debride it and everything. The thing hurts so darn much anyway, but then they will start, it feels like they take a hot cigarette and put it out in the raw part of the thing. And they do this at night just when I'm ready for bed, and they're doing it right now. And no matter where I go, it's there. I was thinking the neighbors, quite possibly, there are perps in this building, could be doing it in terms of the ground-borne satellite. I would have no idea. There's just no way to get rid of it, and drugs don't, painkillers don't touch it. It's just quite awful, unrelenting. And they stole all of my medical records, so they're picking on stuff that has happened maybe 30 years ago, and they'll start to pound it with whatever energy they're using on me, which radio waves or microwaves. Do you have any suggestions for that, just in terms of shielding, maybe?
Yeah.
Now, your thing about the broken mirror, or not the broken, but the multi-sided mirror, if I were to put that over the leg, would that deflect, do you think?
Well, what you would want to use, is your name Melissa? Did I understand that correctly?
Melinda.
I'm sorry, Melinda. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that you're having so much difficulty. I sympathize with you. I wish there was, maybe I can give you some helpful information. Moving magnets can be helpful because it will make it difficult to target a single location. The type of magnet that you want to use is called neodymium, spelled Neodymium. And they're not terribly expensive, but you want to get them in motion. If the signal, you need to try to identify the direction the signal is coming from. Is it coming from vertically overhead?
That's hard to tell because they're affecting it. No matter what I do, no matter which desk or chair I'm sitting at, they can get me. So I would say if I'm lying down, of course, from the roof, I'm on the top floor. Sitting down, it would be from a wall next door. I mean, that's, easy logic for me.
Okay. If one way to try to tell is if you take depending on the sensitivity in your hand or your arm, or maybe your fingertips, is to cover it and try to trace with the back of your hand the direction that the energy is coming from. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I'll try that. I was thinking there's a sensor in there, and if they flick it and turn it on, that's it. It's on. Do you know what I mean? That once it's on, it doesn't matter where I am. That's just a dream thought. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't know.
Well, that's possible. That's certainly possible. Some of the older technology that I've read about seem to indicate that radio frequency chips were used, and it's also my understanding that most of the recent examples don't need any chip at all. But if it's what part of the country are you located in? Do you mind?
I'm in Los Angeles.
Los Angeles.
The Valley, Sherman Oaks, yeah.
Okay. So unless they're using a drone or a portable device from a neighborhood, and both of those are actually fairly unlikely, but it's possible. If you want to try to determine the direction and then put some some of these magnets on strings from your ceiling, for example, if it's coming from the sky. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
And these magnets, if you put a fan blowing them or something like that so that they're constantly moving, it will make it very difficult for them to track a single point. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
A microwave is basically electromagnetic energy, so putting magnets in its way or even close to crossing its path will disrupt the path, okay?
Yeah, and you don't want me to put the magnets on a bandage on my leg. You want them floating in the air.
You want them moving. The more they move, the more difficult, the more it will disrupt the path, okay? And the other thing that might help, or that I've heard, and there might be some other listeners that have some suggestions, that leather, heavy leather can be helpful to wrap the area. If you've got some heavy leather, original, authentic leather, leather is very effective at dampening the microwaves. So you might want to try.
Okay. Now, quickly, 3 quick things just I'm going to throw out to you. AI, could this be done by AI to me? Any thought of the August 21st solar eclipse, and what do you think of flat Earth? You don't have to answer any of those, but if you have a quick thought, might be interesting.
Okay. Well, AI, I have read about one TI that claimed that they were sending messages that were clearly, that he could tell were clearly programmed. It wasn't an individual he was basically getting messages 24 hours a day, on and on and on, talking about anything and everything. It just would never shut up. And he was certain that no person could talk for that long, that it had to be, a computer program. And I tend to agree with him. And that the fact that it was repeating certain phrases and stuff over and over again also seemed to indicate that it was a program. So in theory, that can be done. The software that is used to do that will mimic any human voice, is put out by a software company called Adobe. It's called Adobe Voco, V-O-C-O. And you may have read, I believe it was in Washington, D.C., just a few years ago, where a woman claimed that the president was talking to her and giving her advice and orders all the time, and she tried to drive her car up to the White House gates, and she ended up
being shot. That was so sad.
Yes, it was very sad, and they tried to write her off, and it's very clear that that the government had access to the software that can mimic any voice. It takes, according to the manufacturer, they need 20 minutes of recording of anyone, including the president, and then this computer program will mimic the voice, and it will say anything you want it to say. And so she was utterly convinced that the president was talking to her when in fact it was a computer program. So just be aware that technology exists, and you could certainly prevent the worst of whatever the effects they're trying or intending. And what was your second question?
Oh, the second one was the solar eclipse of August 21st. Been quite a lot of chatter and written on YouTube, a lot of videos on that. There's a lot of very strange things about it, and it also fits in the Bible and various other timelines. And also the flat Earth. Have you read anything on that, or the new stuff they're coming up, the new physics about possibility of a flat Earth with a dome?
Well, I'll start with solar eclipse. It's obviously a fascinating astronomical phenomenon that happens, on a rare enough basis that I think lots of people will be interested in watching, particularly since it's an almost complete or full eclipse over much of the United States. So I do think that it's worth watching. The symbolic implications, and I think many different cultures and religions will interpret those symbols differently. I'm more of a kind of an engineer and a technologist, and I'm fascinated at the phenomena for I would say technology and scientific reasons. And to me, it's I'm like a kid watching. It's just a fascinating event to watch. I don't have any particular symbols or symbolism that goes with it beyond that, but it should be fun to watch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So flat Earth, I can't say that I'm well read on that subject. I'm certainly a fairly open-minded person. I would be willing or interested to read or learn more. It's not something where I have any level of expertise, though.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of interesting videos have come out in the last month and a half from very interesting people, new perspectives, new geometry, geometrical figures that show the possibilities. So it's something, in your spare time or anybody's spare time to look up, because it's very interesting. And, of course, there was a TV show called The Dome. I think they're telling us a lot about what's going on through television and films, but that's kind of common knowledge. The only problem is they make it so complicated sometimes you can't pick up the keys, because they're so buried in programming or storyline, whatever. But anyway, it's just a thought. They say that possibly the eclipse on the 21st can give some indications if indeed there is an anomaly in the circumferences of all these things and the way they are in the universe. So it'll be interesting. Anyway, I want to thank you so much, and I'm going to go get that old piece of leather I have in the drawer. It's very heavy and thick, cowhide, and see what we can do here. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, Melinda.
Thank you.
Okay, so, how are you doing on time? It's 8:15. Do you want to take a few more questions? I just want to be respectful of your time.
My time is all yours, Ella. It's a privilege and honor to be here, and I'll answer questions for as long as folks want to ask them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go to Terry. Terry here in Oregon. Hi, Terry. Yeah, sometimes people have their hands set. Let's see, Terry. Give him another second. Okay, Terry, we can come back to you. Just start whenever you're available. Okay. Just a second to get another caller. Okay, I'm going to come to Northwest California. Hi, California.
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Yes, hi.
Hi. Okay. Sorry, I wasn't sure it was me. Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First of all, you said you were targeted, and you gave us a great bunch of suggestions on how to maybe stop some of this from happening. And I was wondering if you had tried these things yourself, and if you had, what was most successful? That's my first question. The second question is, I also wrote a book, and I've done a lot of research, and there have been several very credible targets that have put out X-rays of their skulls. And in their skulls, there were chips visible in the X-rays. One or two of them actually had them removed, so we know that this is real. And I was wondering if this, I assume some of it was tracking, but maybe not. But I wondered if this was a more advanced form of torture and maybe a way to access the central nervous system more effectively.
Well, that's an interesting question. I have seen a number of medical scans, X-rays from people that have claimed to be TIs, and some interesting things have come up, and not just scans of the head, but the shoulders and feet and knees and lots of different sites. And I don't know. I am certainly not an expert on that technology. It does appear that they are getting away from that. that the chips and the implants are simply not necessary, and it certainly leaves evidence that something was going on. So they have a tendency to not want to pursue technologies that leave any credible deniability on the table. So I can't say that I know to what extent or what detail they were using that technology other than for tracking. And beyond that,
there's a woman scanning people by the name of Melinda Kidder. And somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. I think she said that she was finding frequencies emanating from these human bodies in 90% of the people that she scanned. And so, and you know, it's interesting. She has a partner by the name of Staniger, and she's actually been able to track not the frequencies coming from the body, but the frequencies hitting the body of these victims. And they were, I believe they were within the range that you were speaking about, up in the, 3,200 something up there. And she actually worked with a FCC. I've seen some of these reports. Some of them are online. And some of them have been used in court cases. And she actually used an FCC signals analyst for a short amount of time who was able to trace these back to military and research facilities. So that's out there too. So I was just wondering if you knew about that, and you know, I think there's a lot of different things going on. You know, that they're trying all kinds of different things. That's my own personal take. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying it could be going a bit further than, you know, just simple targeting with microwaves. But the first part of my question was really important, too, which was, have you used any of the things you're suggesting? And if so, what did you feel was most effective in your case for stopping the discomfort?
I can certainly talk about some of the research that I've done. I will again mention that I have pending litigation, and there's going to be subject areas that I can't discuss.
Okay.
I am willing to discuss the technology and the research that I with the measurements that I have made and the contacts that I have made. I can offer suggestions. I certainly am not familiar with all of the technologies that are being used, and I agree that there's certainly more than one.
Right.
The ones that I have been able to contact and take some measurements all involve satellites and our satellite technology. I have read that there is credible information that drones are being used and other methods. Certainly there's at least one CIA agent by the name of Carl Clark who claims they used portable units on the ground and triangulation to attack people. So that would be yet another example. So I would agree that there's more than one technology or means that's being used. And I'm not familiar with Melinda's work. Melinda Kidder, is that who you said?
Yeah, Kidder, Kidder. Right. Yeah, look up those reports. They're called SCADA, SCADA reports, and there's one or two of them online that are really fascinating to look at because they did, measure the frequencies hitting the victim. And they were, if I remember correctly, within the range of what you're talking about. And I just want to say I agree with everything you've said. From my own research, everything, just about everything you've said, I have also discovered. And so, I'm just going a bit further with it. And I'm sorry I forgot you said you can't discuss your own personal case. So I understand that. But anyways, thank you so much for the information. It's fascinating.
Thank you, and I wish you the best, and I appreciate your I'm sure all the listeners appreciate your comments and input.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks, Roseanne. She wrote a really great book, too, on targeting. So she's one of the many authors that we have in the community that's done excellent work. Okay. Thank you, Roseanne. Again. Okay. We have a large number of callers tonight. Only 140. Okay.
Well, that's great.
I know. I don't want to keep you here too long. We're going to have to draw the line somewhere. Okay. Hi, Texas. Okay. You're on the air. Would you have a question for Richard?
Hello, Richard.
Hi.
I'm really fascinated by what you're saying. I haven't heard of any of your work or anything before. I am a communications technician, and I read on Bigger Than Snowden about the 450 megahertz relating to tendinitis. And several past, 2 years, I've been plagued with the tendinitis and haven't been able to discover where it's coming from. But I do work with critical communication frequencies, which is around 450. And I was able to see and demodulate the 450 signal that was causing my tendinitis. And oddly enough, I had also ordered a CD from David for tendinitis, and playing that back, it's and looking at the audio waveforms. There are very complex waveforms on there, and I found out that the demodulated 450 signal sounds just like the audio on David's CD. And the day after that, me and a partner of mine saw this signal. This was at where I work. It stopped. The tendinitis stopped, and they also shut it off at home. So I've been free of the tendinitis, and it was getting real extreme. They obviously know how to vary it to help to a very powerful point to where I'm just kind of in a kind of a confused state of mind, hard to focus my thoughts and get plans sorted and stuff, and it affects my thought process, and is also affecting me physically to where I was spending a lot of time in bed. So I have a suggestion: if people are plagued with the tendinitis, go to a radio shop that repair police radios and critical communication places, and rent a portable radio and have them tune it on the receive side to 450, and take somebody to their home where they're being plagued with tendinitis, and take somebody with them who can use your telephone recorder or a video recorder and take it home and turn the portable radio on. And if you get a demodulated signal, audio signal that sounds just like David's tinnitus CD, then you have means of litigation. But I understand that the FCC actually has allowed the police to actually use that frequency. Is that correct?
I would have to look that up on an FCC frequency chart, and anyone can, but I do think that there are a number of frequency bands in there that are used for emergency services, as you mentioned.
Yeah, well, that's just a suggestion, but it really took care of my tinnitus.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm sure there's some listeners that appreciate that comment.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thanks.
That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, I'm going to come to Oregon now. I don't know if they've been there a while, so let's see if they're there still. Hi, Oregon. Oregon, would you like to ask Richard a question? Find somebody else. I'm going to come to 657. I believe this is Cece. Hi.
Hi there.
Cece.
I would like to ask his opinion on why he thinks there are so many targeted individuals in certain states, including, I know there's, from what I've heard, a lot in North and South Carolina, Colorado, California. These seem to be, and Florida as well. So do you think there's something to that? Because if the satellites are targeting us, then why aren't there targets evenly spaced throughout the United States? That's just one of my questions. And the other one, because they're messing with me right now, I can barely think. I wrote it down. Hold on. I forgot what it was already. But you can go ahead and elaborate on your thoughts on that.
Okay. First of all, thanks for your question. And I think it's an interesting point, and I'm not sure I can say for sure how evenly spaced folks or targets are, but I do think that William Binney's global survey should kind of narrow down our understanding of that, and I think that's one of the reasons that they're trying to do that survey, and I encourage folks to participate in that. It's online. You just answer some questions, apparently, and I think that the data that they gather from that will be very helpful in determining which, if any, areas are focused on more than others, and maybe there's a reason for that. And I would be curious to know what that is.
Some TIs recognize that they've been targeted since they were very, very young, even as a child. And then some targets believe that they became targets out of retaliation. I'm a whistleblower and an injured worker, and I believe that my targeting occurred because of that initially. And then someone, I think it was Miss McKinney, a former military gal, who said, no matter when you think your targeting began, go back another 10 or 20 years and see, try to remember, was there any nuance that could potentially have been early onset targeting? And so I have done that, and I have to say there could be correlation to that. There, for example, the pain behind my eyes that I'm feeling right now, I have felt before I even realized I was being targeted, long before, years ago. And I remember when I worked in Irvine for a certain escrow company, I always felt like I shouldn't say I always felt like. At times I thought, am I being monitored? Am I being watched? And one of the in fact, the president's son was transferred to my office, and he became my assistant. And he told me one day that he was transferred there to keep an eye on all of us, which probably is true and may or may not have anything to do with my targeting. And then, of course, he later denied. He came back in. I guess he was told to retract that, so he came back in one day and denied that. Anyway, long story short, there were nuances that could be a correlation to early onset targeting, but they were so slight that I would not, I initially, let me put it this way. The targeting was in my face just after one of my employers, who I was prepared to blow the whistle on. He was an attorney. He said to me, if you tell anyone, yada, yada, about what was going on in his office, he and his friends in high places could make my life very difficult. And I kid you not, it was pretty apparent that I got locked out of my apartment. I got eggs thrown out at my front porch. I set up security because things started kind of going on, but I just thought I didn't correlate it to some of it seemed natural, like you know what, I cannot find my words. They're interfering in my thoughts right now, so I'm going to pass, but I'm going to pass the phone to somebody else because they're interfering in my thoughts and I can't get out what I want to say. So, but I just I wanted to say some of us are clearly a part of some sort of retaliation program, and some of us or some folks believe that they have been a target most of their lives. And my thoughts are this. Here's my last question. How is this helping our nation? If it is the CIA, NSA, and these different covert operations, black projects, how is this helping our nation? Or can we just casually say, well, there are some people involved in these programs that are extending retaliation to friends in business, to corporations, or maybe they're selling these tactics and retaliation programs to corporations, because there are a lot of whistleblowers who are targets like myself, and I'm not a whistleblower in government. I'm a whistleblower in a corporation, so to speak. Do you kind of understand what I'm saying? Anyway, I'm gonna shut up because I'm being targeted right now. My eyes hurt, my head hurts. So anyway, go ahead.
Well, I appreciate your comments. You brought out some good points there. I think there are. I don't know that I could say there was a specific reason. I think a lot of people have speculated on different reasons and specific outcomes that different sectors of the government was hoping to achieve. But I think behind that, as I had mentioned earlier, the answer for me has always been follow the money. That's where you get your answer on this one. And in my opinion, and I published a brief ebook on it, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, the Council on Foreign Relations are the money and the order givers, and their long-term strategy and goals are not certainly in the best interests of all Americans, in my opinion. So I'm not sure that's it.
One of the other things that Dr. John Hall said was that where there's a target, there's almost always a private investigative firm or a law firm. And that certainly seems to be the case in my targeting. But, you know, I could be wrong about it. Again, it's a PSYOPs program, and they don't want me to know. You know, anything they can do to destroy my credibility is useful to their plan. But I'm just amazed that this happens. I've been a target for several years now that I know of, and I was, you don't know my story. Most everybody on the phone does, but I was actually brutally forced under anesthesia in a beautiful surgery center and maimed from my skull down to my tailbone. And now I'm disabled, and that certainly seems like retaliation to me, or perhaps it was part of trauma-based mind control. I don't know. But those involved in my workers' comp claim seem to have no problem in participating in events that took place through my claim, including the judge. So it's definitely, how do I want to say, George Carlin used to say, it's a club, and we're not in it. You know, we're just the pawns. And we're getting stepped on and abused and tormented. And, we're just looking for any avenue to, not even fight back, but to shield ourselves from these horrific attacks. And surprisingly, why doesn't our Congress and senators do something about this? Why is it that they, in a sense, they're cooperating as well because, for example, even Dr. John Hall said you got to get out of the state of California because people who have written our senators, for example, somebody wrote to Dianne Feinstein about targeting, organized stalking, and directed energy weapons, and she wrote back for them to go get psychological help. She's on the intelligence committee, so you can't tell me she doesn't know about these programs. Anyway, there's one of my ideas was to contact some of the people on these intelligence programs and basically tell them, if you don't help us, then you are part of the problem. Then, you need to be removed or voted out of office because this is happening to the American people and you're not protecting us, and that is their job, to protect us, including from, essentially this is domestic terrorism, what we're going through. So, anyway, Ella,
Thank you.
Phone. Thank you, Ella.
Thank you for your comments.
Yeah, thank you, Cece. Okay, I'm going to go to James Lico. He's next. Hi, James.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, great. I had one question about infrasound, and this goes back to Melinda's question, because I didn't understand. Melinda's said it was a bare patch or some skin was missing, and what I have was boils on my skin. They create these boils with it seems like infrasound, and from what I understand, infrasound is 20 hertz. Yeah, 20 hertz and below, and no, 20 to 20,000. Yeah, 20 hertz and below, and ultrasound is above 20,000 hertz. And what I notice is that they're with these boils, they're hurting, but they're only hurting when they put energy into them. And the energy, I couldn't figure it out. And then by accident, I put my hand over it to cover it, and that stopped it. But if I took my hand partially off of it, it would start up again. So I thought maybe that's possibly sound, And I have a degree in an associate's degree in electronics engineering technology, so I'm not, I know some things. And let's see. So I found that you can put something like Vaseline on it and then put a bandage over it, and that would give me relief. And the thing about the leather, well, that's kind of like skin. Leather is animal skin, so that made sense why that worked. So I just thought I'd throw those things out there. And I just want to say, I would like to hear your thoughts on infrasound, if you could. And the lady previous said that we should think back 10 or 20 years about the targeting. Well, I managed to think back about 5 to 10, and I discovered that I was targeted back when I worked for Martin Marietta in Piketon, Ohio. And, surprise, surprise. And I remember my boss saying that he had a phased array antenna on his roof, and some of the things that I was told were similar to the targeting I have, and it took all that time to actually remember them. So that was another thing. And then I remembered further back to when I was, and I had social anxiety disorder. That lasted for about, I'm just guessing about, I don't have time to work it back, but 5 to 10 years. And then it came, as quickly as it came on, it went away. And then before that, I had headaches right after high school. I was a boy, and these headaches would come on very suddenly and stay for a while and then go away just as quickly. And then, after 5 to 10 years, those stopped totally, just like as if, like one day, I didn't get headaches anymore. That was another thing. So I might have been targeted back when I was a child. So, so I just wanted to comment on that, and then the infrasound. So thank you.
Well, thanks for your comments, James. I can't say that I know a lot about the infrasound technology. Again, most of my measurements have been from satellite-based technologies, and in theory, it is possible to insert just about any frequency into under that primary carrier wave, and it could be carried from the satellite to ground. I can't say that I know much about the infrasound range as far as harmful technologies, though. But you do bring up an interesting point, and it's something that I will look into and try to do a little research on.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, James. Okay. Let's see here. Let me get to the next question. Okay, I'm going to come up to the handle Lurked 2012. Hi there.
Hi, Amir. I didn't have a question exactly, but I was just wanting to check in and say hello.
Okay. Well, hi. Thanks for checking in with us.
All right.
Okay, let's see here. I'm going to come to Missouri, North Missouri. There we go. Hi, Missouri. Do you have a question for Richard?
Could you tell me briefly what the topic is?
I'm sorry?
What, in a nutshell, is his specialty, so I can ask an appropriate question, please?
Do you want to answer that for me, Richard?
Sure. My background is in mechanical engineering, and I've previously worked for NASA, and I'm interested in the technologies that are being used by satellites under the intelligence agencies, and been doing some research on it for since about January of 2016.
And you sort of want to know what people are experiencing?
I'm sorry?
He wants to know what people are experiencing, just to sort of get a snapshot of what, a snippet of what everyone's experiences are.
Do you have a question?
Well, yeah. Do you have a question along those lines?
A question.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and mute you, and when you have a question, just star 8, and we'll come back to you. Okay, so I'm going to go to Florida, North Florida. Hi, Florida.
Hey, Anna. How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing all right. How are you?
Good. Hanging in there, girl. I'm hanging in there. But I am especially pleased to hear, is it Dr. Lighthouse?
No,
the program?
No. just Richard.
Just Richard. Okay, Richard, I'm Sandra, so good to meet you.
Hi, Sandra.
Hi. I just wanted to run something by you because I understand, at least as much as I can understand, of what you were saying about the technicalities of the the satellite systems and so on, but also just wanted everyone to know that, again, it's many layers to this thinking onion with this thing, and Raytheon has a portable weapon. The patent number is WO 270-22 339A3, and there are a few more numbers listed. I guess maybe as it was being developed, I'm not sure the how that part of it goes, but that was the number I initially found it under. And so this is Kenneth W. Brown is one of the inventors on this particular weapon, and he has a lot of stuff that came up under Raytheon. But this particular portable weapon comprises a non-lethal and a lethal portion. And I'm just reading basically what the abstract says. It says the lethal portion may comprise a rifle, and the non-lethal portion may comprise a millimeter wave directed energy weapon. The non-lethal portion may comprise a kit to add non-lethal capability to a lethal weapon. And the non-lethal portion may comprise an output antenna to generate a high-power millimeter wave initial wave front, a main reflector, and a sub-reflector to reflect the initial wave front to the main reflector. And the main reflector may direct the reflected wave front in a four-sided direction towards a target. So that's just one of the portable weapons that are out there. But I also wanted to ask Richard about the another patent that I became aware of. It's the methods and apparatus for wide area synthetic aperture radar detection. So under that, it said methods and apparatus for providing a first radar system having a transmitter and a receiver and a reflector to provide a synthetic aperture radar relationship. The signal return is processed to generate an image of targets, plural targets, in the area. The reflector can be stationary, parabolic, or ring-shaped. So my question actually to you is, because I've thought for quite some time that the common home satellite dish, that they're using that to harm us. And also, so what do you think about that, first of all? And what might you know about the Helmholtz resonator? And would it have something to do with the fact that I and many other TIs are vibrating like nobody's business? I mean, just sometimes that vibration is so strong, it's unbelievable. And so when I went to get some additional information about the Helmholtz resonator, I at the library, I quickly found out that information apparently falls under the Patriot Act, because the information returned to me was that only certain individuals could access that information. So there's that. And can a resonator be could it be a do-it-yourself type job as well?
Okay, those are good questions. First of all, we can touch base on the Raytheon portable systems. I had mentioned previously there's a former CIA agent named Carl Clark, and he has described in some of the statements he's made that they use portable equipment. He didn't mention any specific manufacturer names, but simply made reference to the fact that they do have portable pieces of equipment that one person can carry, and that his assignment was to triangulate the TIs that they were tracking, and that they were able to do that on the ground, that they weren't using satellites or drones or anything like that, and that this was early on, so this was quite a few years ago that he was involved with this. So it's clear that the portable technology does exist, and I would imagine that Raytheon isn't the only one that can make it. But you bring up a good patent there. That's a good reference. The other question you asked involving a radar patent.
With reference to, there was the the synthetic radar aperture, I believe it's called. And so it basically seems like with that, with that device or technology, that they would be able to track, let's say, I don't know how large an area, but I would say a pretty wide area. And just wondering if you had any knowledge of the scope that might entail.
Well, it's a good point. The radar type equipment generally broadcasts a very wide signal, whereas most of the TIs are describing what is more of a precision signal generation that's very focused. And so the radar technology is very effective at, say, locating moving aircraft in the sky, or traffic, for example, a traffic pattern if they're used on freeway signs above the freeway. But they in general will broadcast over a very wide range and then take a reflected signal that comes back that gives general shapes and general features, but doesn't give sort of the precision targeting that's required to do some of the things that you've heard some people describe tonight.
Well, yeah, I've always gotten the electronic end of it, the microwave, the burning, so that I was just wondering how wide of an area that might cover. But you've kind of explained, the basics of that. So I really do appreciate that very much. And then I guess the only other thing left was the resonator. Well, you know what? There is a microwave transmitter receiver device with light pointing and tracking system. So that sounds like something similar to what you were speaking about earlier. And I've been heavily targeted with microwaves. Really almost from the time I kind of realized what was happening. So with that and understanding what you said about the magnets, because I've never really attempted any shielding for various reasons, but that the magnets, what you said about that was very, very interesting to me, and something that I think I may give a shot at. But just wondered if you might have any thoughts about the resonator, the Helmholtz resonator, what that does, and if it could be homemade, because I believe that I came across one that was a do-it-yourself job.
Well, I certainly couldn't. I can't say that I'm that familiar with Helmholtz resonators, and I neither could I rule it out as being something that they might experiment with. But in general, the frequencies that they're using are much different than what a Helmholtz resonator does. But I've also heard several people describe this sort of vibrations that I think you're describing, and that's not necessarily due to a different apparatus or a different device. The specific frequencies that we've discussed tonight could provide the same phenomena, that sort of vibration, particularly if you're close to a wall or a desk or some firm surface that you're basically agitating it to its own natural resonant frequency. So the frequency you're getting is kind of a secondary effect, but it's not coming from a different device. Does that make any sense? It would be sort of like when someone plays loud bass music, and you can feel feel the puffs of air, or you can feel the vibration in the door of the car, for example. And it's not because the door is playing the music. It's simply a secondary vibration that's being picked up from the bass frequencies in the music. So it's not using necessarily a separate device. It's just it's a secondary vibration that's coming from sort of the primary. I'm not sure that makes sense, but
I think I understand what you're saying about that, because there's something called a bass frequency, and I'm not really I'm the least technical person you would ever meet. But when I was reading about that, it sounds similar to what you're saying. About the vibrations, but honestly, sometimes they're so strong it just feels like it doesn't feel like it's a secondary thing. Is what I'm saying.
Okay. Well, so I have also read that other frequencies can be used, and they're not for example, the ELF waves are very low frequency vibrations, and there are signal generators that are like a very low frequency bass speaker, and those frequencies aren't absorbed by the atmosphere or by buildings or anything else. They will travel for many, many miles, and it doesn't slow them down. So that is one possible source, is that some of these the ELF waves are called extremely low frequency waves, and they will produce a vibration type of effect. But whether or not that's not necessarily coming from a satellite. It could come from someone on the ground that's simply pointing one of these ELF signal generators, and it's not necessarily a satellite-based technology. So I don't doubt that you're feeling that. I don't have any way to identify without measuring it, what the source might be.
Okay, and one last question, please. What, I'm not sure how to put it, but there was I came across information, the effects of microwaves on the central nervous system, or the human nervous system, however it was put. And so when we are being, basically attacked as we are, do you have any information on how these devices and this technology is affecting us at a molecular level, the cellular level? Simply because I've read a lot of information about different things that that can happen with the central nervous system and with other things. My friend Melinda earlier was talking to you about her leg, and I had sort of a similar issue with mine, and so I'm just wondering if you have information. I know you're not a medical doctor, but maybe you've come across some information that is relative to that question.
It's an excellent question and an excellent point, and I do want to be better informed about sort of the biological effects, and I am reading and learning like many other folks here tonight are. And Dr. John Hall, in his books, provides a good bit of background on some of the biological effects. Primarily, the microwaves cause thermal heating and expansion in the body, in the cells, and so that's what causes kind of the inflammation and the throbbing and the pain that might be associated with some of the minor effects. I have read information that suggests fish oil, which are high in omega-3 and omega-6, will actually help with some of that. So for folks that are experiencing inflammation in joints or pain that they think might be related to that, I can suggest fish oil supplements, which are not expensive at all. It certainly won't hurt you, but unless, of course, you're allergic to fish oil. But it's the omega-3s and omega-6 in the oil will help with the inflammation, and that's something that you could try.
Well, thank you very much. I'll definitely look at your site, and very appreciative of the information this evening that you put on the table. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
And thank you for your questions and comments.
Thanks, Florida. Okay, I think I can't go too much longer, so I'm going to take just a couple more questions. And it's earlier where I am. It's a little later where you're at. Okay. I'm going to go to Massachusetts. Hi, Massachusetts.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, excellent. I really enjoyed the program. Can I please have the correct spelling of his last name so I can go to his site?
Sure. It's my website is Lighthouse, and Lighthouse is spelled LIGHTHOUSE.
Okay.
Okay.
.com?
Rlighthouse.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to go up to Arlene. She's been waiting a while. She's not there anymore. Let me go to Lily Laroon. Hi there.
Hi.
Hi, you're there.
Ella. Hi, thanks for putting me on, Ella. Haven't talked to you in a while.
I know, it's been a while.
Yeah, this is a really great speaker. I'm really learning a lot. I missed some of it, sadly, but I can always catch it on the tape later, some of it. But I did have some questions if he has the time. One of the things I might have missed it if he already said it, so please excuse me if I missed it. I was just curious if he had any insight as to, I know at the beginning I had caught something about the FBI, CIA, and confidential payments. That did not shock me at all, that perhaps they were doing things like that and paying people and ordering them to do this to us. It totally didn't shock me because I remember when I naively went to the FBI in my area and the runaround I was given, and they practically, I told them I was having trouble with the mail for one thing, and they told me to send them a letter. And they just made the whole thing, it was like a comedy show. They came out to the car to talk to me, Agent 1, Agent 2, taking notes. I mean, it just was like a joke. So I just got a sense I wasn't getting any help from them and was feeling even then that perhaps they might have a hand in it. So that part didn't surprise me. But I was wondering if you had any inkling, what the motivation would be. I mean, how would they make money by doing that? I just don't get it. I get where, they're going to increase their payroll, they're going to get grants to do more of it and more of it. But in the end, what are they financially, if you have any idea, gaining from that, any of these agencies doing this to us?
Well, I certainly don't know all of the details, and I would assume that sooner or later there will be a whistleblower in the FBI that will come forward and provide more information. Ted Gunderson is one of the best sources that I can recommend. He has just been a treasure trove of amazing information for those listeners that have never heard of Ted Gunderson, and I urge you to or encourage you to seek out information on him. What they did to him.
Yeah, I know he is. Yeah, maybe that's why they don't have a lot of people who blow the whistle anymore, sadly to say.
Well, yeah, that's unfortunate. I don't think, my own opinion is it's not going to discourage whistleblowing. I think that some of these folks have enough integrity that absolutely nothing will discourage them from doing what's right. And I know many people that are certainly not involved with any of this that would gladly, under their own integrity, stand up for whatever they knew to be right, regardless of the circumstances and the situation.
Well, we certainly pray for more Ed Snowdens. The other quick questions I had for you, because I know time is so limited, and these are kind of quick. Sounds like we don't have answers on that yet, and we're just praying for more whistleblowers, which would be great. Just if you had any insight as to, we've been hearing a lot lately on some of the calls about the alleged so-called illegal alien mafia, and how they are gaining some of our assets. And this might have something to do with our targeting, that they are, targeting us with the hope maybe to take our attention off perhaps some assets that we have and, perhaps even eliminate us and then sell our benefits that we might have, some of them, to the illegal immigrants that come over here, so to speak. I don't know if you had any insight on that or not.
I can't say that I know much about that. Most of my research has been focused on kind of the technology side, and my background is an engineer, so the science and the math and the physics that go into it is something that I'm very curious about, and something that I hope that I can share and help others with.
Oh, that's amazing, and we appreciate it so much because I think a lot of us are not well versed in those areas. Maybe more of us, I think, seem to be more the social sciences or whatever, like myself. One question along that line, then, and this hopefully this be my last question. I appreciate your answers. I know you guys are getting tired, and it's coming to the end. One of them is I noticed a lot of times they've been frying out my radios, CD players, and things like that, especially ones that might help me. Like, we have a targeted person who came up with a CD that supposedly helps the tinnitus and things, and they will mess with that. So I can't hear it, and other TIs have said the same thing. How are they doing that? Like, how are they, and my charger too, like other people will say their cell phones will burn out or whatever. With me, they seem to get the chargers get really hot, and it just seems like they burn things out with me. The electric stove gets really hot, and the radios fry out. I even had one with an antenna. They kept messing with the antenna on the radio, and then just totally ruining my signal on like 4 or 5 different radios. So I'm wondering what is up with that, if you have any insight with your
I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked that, because I've heard that same comment from people before. In general, what they're doing, if it's, for example, a car radio or a car DVD player or a portable CD player that has a radio on it, they're going through the radio frequency to get at the software that's built into the radio. Okay, whether it's your car or a CD player in your car. So the way you defeat that is you change the radio station often. Okay. Randomly change the radio station on AM and FM, and it prevents them from accessing the device. Does that make sense? But that's how they're doing it. In other words, if your radio is tuned to FM 100, they can tune a signal generator to FM 100 and send a frequency that will alter the programming in the device. Does that make sense? So by constantly changing the radio station, now they can't get at it. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I have tried those things. Like, I have even heard switch the radio station. I've heard put the white noise thing on. That helps a little bit. Is that true too? Like, if you go in between 2 stations, supposedly that messes them up too. I've heard. I don't know if that's true, but I have heard that one. I've tried it. It seems to help a little bit. Sometimes, too, when I would go away from my car, I would come back and they'd have all the stations changed, too. So they would mess with it while I was away from my car. I don't know if obviously they must have turned it on to do it. It was a smart car, so that would make it much easier. But I would come back and all my stations would be messed up, changed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, each different manufacturer is going to put slightly different software and programming in it. So there's not. I can't say that there's one general rule that would apply in every instance, but I would suggest changing the radio station on a regular basis and see if that doesn't help. I think you might find that helps.
Okay. Well, thank you. I have one more person that had their hand up earlier, and I think they weren't able to get to the phone. Do you mind one last question?
No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Terry, I'm going to come to you, and hopefully you're available. Hold on 1 second. Uh-oh. He's not there. He must have hung up right at the time. Okay, well, if that's the case, let me go to one person. Let me just double check. He was just right there. Okay. I'll just go to Texas. You're the last question, Texas. Hi, Texas.
Hi, this is Texas again. I wanted to clarify something that I had spoken with you earlier on Dave's CD for tinnitus.
Okay.
Yeah, what I was saying was that when I was demodulating the 450 megahertz signal, that I had found that was tinnitus at work. It sounded just like Dave's CD, the audio, but it sounded like I was discrediting Dave's CD and saying that Dave's CD was causing tinnitus. No,
it's okay.
I believe it's the opposite. I think Dave's tinnitus CD is working great to interfere with the damage that the signal, the audio signal is doing.
His scatter frequency CD. Yep, that seems like, I generally hear positive things about that.
Yeah, it's proven to be quite effective. So
yeah, for tinnitus and different, probably disruption of signals. What do you think?
I think that's a good possibility. I mean, it's not something that I've heard of before, but it sounds very interesting, and clearly, if it works or it's effective, that's I think that speaks well for it. It's not something that I have researched in the past, though, but something that if I come across something similar to that, I'll certainly try to catch up on it.
Well, I just want to say thank you. We've been listening to Richard Lighthouse. He's an author. He's worked for NASA. He's an engineer, and he has a website. It's rlighthouse.com, and a lot of his books are free for downloads. And I just want to say thank you so much, and I hope you come back. You just are a wealth of information yourself, and just very appreciative of you.
Oh, and I appreciate time, and I hope I can help out a little bit. Thanks for letting me be on your show, Ella.
Okay, thank you. Okay, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end the call. If you are interested in doing a late-night support call, you can call on the same number, and Kyle's number is 142-394. Again, that's 142-394, and he offers great support, and he's also an activist and has some great videos. And so if you guys want to, most of you guys already know who he is. So, and if you don't, just head on over there. Thanks, guys.
Is the last few rings that are on the end of this satellite can be used to alter the direction that microwave bullet is traveling. And so simply by increasing the current or decreasing the current on any edge of that ring, they can cause it to deflect that microwave bullet just a little bit, and it'll change the direction that it's going in any direction, north, south, east, or west. And it only takes a small amount of electrical current to alter it to make a huge change on where it hits on the ground. I hope everybody's following me. I hope I'm not getting too technical. But if you look at
it's very much welcome. We don't have too many people. We have a lot of people who come on with theories, no facts, no evidence, or things like that. But maybe they do, that we're not aware of. So a person like you brings credence and credibility, and you're backing it up with information that these are in areas you've worked in. So we really appreciate your knowledge.
Okay, and I'm not saying that I'm an expert on these things, but I have studied engineering, and I do know a little bit about satellites and lasers and the development of microwave energy. So
you worked
again,
with NASA. You have NASA understanding.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So I'm not saying that I'm an absolute expert on all this. I'm telling you, but from an engineering perspective. Without getting into the math and stuff like that of how these components work and how they got into orbit in the first place, okay? So basically the satellites that are being used for this are the satellites that were designed as part of Reagan's Star Wars program. That's what they're using, okay? A lot of people have come up with other ideas, speculated on about what's up there, when they put it up. Just recently, one of the members of the Senate Intelligence Committee proposed that the government need to put up even more satellites to use for anti-ballistic missile tracking and targeting in space, as though the Star Wars Reagan program, those satellites are somehow never made it to orbit or are not operable, but now they're going to go put up some more. Right. Most people aren't following the logic of that because they don't know the history of it. But anyway. So I would strongly discourage your senators and congressmen from putting up additional satellites because they're not going to use them on missiles.
Right, because they're already there, more than we even realize. I do believe that, and I don't have evidence of that. But from what I understand, there's probably 5 times more than maybe you or I might even suspect is up there, or that we know for a fact that's up there. So it's, I think the whole satellite thing is quite scary.
Well, it's unfortunate that there are people in our government intelligence agencies that are just this disturbed that would find either humor or game or political intent out of various forms of torture, and it's disturbing. It reminds me of the Nazis and Dr. Mengele and some of the horrific experiments that were done by him, and some of the later CIA experiments, horrific, grisly science experiments done by Dr. Ewan Cameron, conducted under a CIA program called MK-Ultra. And anyway, for those that are interested, I encourage you to research and read some of that material. There's a great deal of it. A ballistic missile, if that's hit with microwaves, literally in 1 to 2 seconds, all of those circuits can be overloaded and melted. Now, imagine these circuits are just tiny little pieces of metal wire on a circuit board. So any burst of microwave energy will literally fry those circuits in 1 to 2 seconds, okay, very quick. That's what these satellites were designed to do. That's why they shoot microwave bullets, and that's how the tracking system was designed to track the nose cone of a missile and then fire on it. So there are literally 2 separate signals that are used in targeting individuals on the ground. There's a tracking and geolocation signal, and the second signal is what you call the harm signal, the one that they can turn up to a very high intensity. Now, the tracking signal operates at a frequency of about 3650 megahertz. That's 3650 megahertz. And the signal actually varies quite a bit because the more people they try to track, the larger the signal width they have to take up. So I would estimate roughly that between about 3,600 and 3,750 megahertz, you'll find that tracking signals are being used. So if someone uses a signal analyzer, they're going to discover there's 2 signals that are coming down. The second signal is the harm signal. And that's a very tight range of signals between 3921 megahertz and 3934 megahertz. That's the measurements that I've taken on these signals. It's a very narrow range, and the reason it's such a narrow range is because it tells you that all the satellites were designed with the same component. That harm signal is basically the resonant cavity that you find in your microwave oven, except it's even smaller, but it runs at a much higher power level. And the way a microwave, and I won't want to get into details on how a microwave oven works, but basically it looks like a hollow metal ball about the size of a baseball. And when you put a spark through there between the negative and positive anodes in that chamber, it creates a resonant frequency that's equal to the size of that metal chamber. And the frequency gets higher as that metal ball gets smaller. Okay, I'm not sure you all are following me, but so you could basically appreciate, if you look at a microwave diagram, how a microwave oven is constructed, you can get a basic idea of what goes into designing these satellites. Now, immediately after this resonant cavity that's shaped kind of like about the size of a baseball, there's a tube that comes out of it that's designed to hold that frequency and transfer it down a narrow corridor that's lined with circular magnets. And if you look on on that ebook that I referenced, there's actually a picture of a technician constructing one of these satellites. And it looks like it's about 12 to 15 feet tall, and you'll see these large circular magnets. Those magnets are what's used to concentrate and focus that microwave signal that's coming out of that little chamber that I described, okay? Now, what's interesting about it is if you had to repoint and focus the satellite each time that you fired a little microwave bullet, it would never do the job. So what they do, or it's a scientific engineering tool that can be used to measure the frequency of a signal. And what's interesting about these particular signals is they're fairly unique in the frequency spectrum. There are the satellite targeting, a little bit of history on the satellite targeting. Reagan's Star Wars program was announced back in the 1980s. In spite of what was announced by the government as official information, and what we were told later on is they had spent billions of dollars, but nothing ever got put in orbit, and that's a lie. That's simply not true. There are many satellites in orbit. They're placed in geosynchronous orbit. That's a term that means that the satellite stays stationary to the ground. In other words, it's orbiting the Earth at about 20,000 miles per hour, but the satellite stays fixed above one place on the ground. And that's what enables it to track and target things over a specific area that the satellite is located above. Now, these particular satellites were designed to attack ballistic missiles in the launch phase or the ascent phase. Now, if I use some technical terms here, write it down or ask me a question, and I'll try to explain it a little bit further. But the Star Wars program was designed to attack a ballistic missile in the ascent phase. Now, what is apparent is that these satellites stayed in orbit for several years and had basically nothing to do. And at some point, somebody decided to point them on the ground and noticed that when the intensity of the signal was turned down, that they could target people or individuals or groups on the ground. And I would suspect, and again, this is just my opinion, that the initial tracking and targeting was not very accurate. But some folks have described the technology as being alien. It's not. The technology that's used is actually quite simple. And if you download my free ebook called The Microwave Torture of Ed Snowden and Julian Assange, you'll see I provide diagrams and math that explains how the technology works. And it's not complicated. It's not some sophisticated, advanced alien technology or any other terms that you want to use. It's a simple, repetitive signal that's used, and then you use pluses or minuses to determine where a target is moved. It does not require any chip implants. It does not require radio frequency tracking on the ground. All of this can be done without any chips or tracking on the ground. The satellites have the capability to track a target by firing multiple little bullets or shots. And then based on the reflection of each one of those bullets, they can tell how a target is tracked and moving. So again, there's no chip that is required to use this, okay? Now let me back up again and describe what these satellites were originally intended for. Everyone's familiar with a microwave oven. And if you've ever accidentally put a piece of metal in a microwave oven, you know what happens. Literally in 1 second, that piece of metal will start sparking. And you can imagine if that metal was microcircuits on a guidance and navigation and control system inside the nose cone of it was, nothing was stolen, but things in the house had clearly been moved. Repositioned furniture, books, things in the cabinets, all the drawers had been gone through, files. And it was clear that someone was repeatedly getting into the house. And after I started telling my family and friends about it, it became blatant. It became to where they would deliberately break the lock a padlock that I would put on the garage door. I removed the electronic garage door opener and put a padlock on the outside, and they would deliberately break it so that when I came home, I would find the padlock broken. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. And maybe some listeners have had similar experiences, but anyway, I didn't want to cover so much background. I think where I can provide the most value tonight is on technical subjects. I know lots of folks have provided stories, and those stories are interesting and compelling. And what I hope to provide tonight is a scientific and engineering perspective on some of the technologies that are being used and how to disable some of them. And I think that would be very helpful to some people.
Yeah, I think that would be very welcomed. But there are just a couple of questions I had that I think would interest the listeners as well. Is when this started occurring with you, most people are curious how someone finds out about the word targeted individual, how that comes into your consciousness, and how you became, what compelled you to actually write books on the topic, other than maybe your personal experience.
I do a lot of research, and anyone that's read through my website will see that I'm interested in a great variety of topics, and so and I'm just a creative person. So that's what drove my interest in researching this topic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then did someone come out, the first time you heard the word, did someone approach you or write you a letter, or you just kind of figured it out, or you found some information online?
I don't recall exactly how that came about, but yeah.
Yeah, and then I know that you also go into depth about mind control, subliminal mind control. I know that's an area that also interests you, and that kind of ties into us as well. And then you seem fairly certain that satellites have something to do with the targeting and with the subliminals. Can you tell us why that you believe it's satellites?
Well, I have measured, I've had extended discussions with 3 different individuals, and I think these, and I'm not going to identify them by name for their own privacy, but I've had extensive discussions and taken measurements and confirmed independently some of the things that are occurring. And that's also corroborated by many of the stories I've read from John Finch, Dr. Catherine Horton, Dr. John Hall, and many others that are names that are probably familiar to some readers and listeners. One of the things that's particularly compelling is some of the frequencies that I measured using what's called a signal analyzer. Signal analyzer.
Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Welcome to the Tuesday Night's Triumph Over Targeting podcast. I'm your moderator, Ella, and tonight we have another special guest, Richard Lighthouse. A couple of things before we get the interview going. If you are new to the call, please stay on, and we will get you some additional support, some additional TalkShoe podcast numbers, and some helpful links and websites. This is a solutions and educational-based podcast, but the views and opinions of my guests are not necessarily my own personal views and opinions. My goal is that everyone can obtain something out of tonight, especially a feeling of empowerment. If you have any suggestions, comments, questions, or especially if you are in need of some additional support, please don't hesitate to email me at tiangel2016@gmail.com. And then I want to let you guys know that when we get to the questions and answers portion of the interview, you'll star 8. And then when I get to you, I will unmute you, and you will hear a prompt that tells you that you're being unmuted. And at that point, you'll be free to ask your question. So now, to get to our guest, a little bit about Richard. Richard holds a Master of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from Stanford University and has previously worked for NASA. He is currently an executive in the energy industry, and he's written over 100 ebooks and started investigating satellite weapons and global microwave torture of thousands of people in January 2016. Richard himself has become a target of the government. For more than 4 years, this author has been stalked, harassed, and threatened by U.S. government agents from the CIA, FBI, and NSA. He believes this is due to the contents of his books. His home has been broken into repeatedly, and in May 2014, his girlfriend was drugged and kidnapped from LaGuardia Airport. His computer, phone, and alarm system have been hacked, including those of his friends and family. He believes these agencies have become criminal organizations. And I think most of us will agree with that on this call. And, the people who listen to these calls fully are on board with that belief system. So maybe if it's okay with you, we can go back a little bit, and I'd like to discuss your background a little bit further. And if that's okay with you, can we do that?
Sure.
So, yeah, I understand, you got a degree in mechanical engineering, and so it's always nice to know what a person's life was to kind of get a framework of what your life was like prior to this discovery that you made and going down these little rabbit holes and before you were kind of targeted by the government. So would you give us a little information and tell us a little bit about that?
I'm an engineer by training, and I started my career in the aerospace industry and then moved into the energy industry. And beginning about 2009, 2010, I started working on some technical papers involving some complex subjects in mathematics related to Einstein's relativity theory. And I started developing those ideas and began to publish them on the internet. And I was excited about it, but didn't think anything would come of it right away. Then, sometime during 2012, odd things started to happen around the house. My home started to be broken into on a regular basis.